Welcome, travelers, and thank you for being here tonight. Before we begin this journey into profound Buddhist wisdom about life's deeper meaning, I invite you to share in the comments what time it is, where you are, and where in the world you're listening from. There's something beautiful about knowing we're all gathered here together, people from different corners of the earth, all seeking the same understanding that perhaps nothing in our lives is random, that maybe everything, even the difficulties, carries meaning we haven't yet discovered. Tonight you're going to explore one of Buddhism's most comforting and challenging teachings, the idea that everything happens for a reason, not in some simplistic way, not in a way that dismisses your pain or suggests you deserved your hardships, but in a deeper understanding of how all things are connected, how causes create effects, how what seems like chaos might actually be an intricate web of meaning we're only beginning to see. As you settle into rest, let your breathing slow naturally. Let your body release the tension it's been holding. You don't need to work hard at understanding these teachings. Just allow them to wash over you like gentle waves, carrying you deeper into peace with each story, each breath, each moment of letting go. Buddhism teaches something that might sound fatalistic at first, but is actually deeply empowering. Everything that happens is the result of causes and conditions coming together. Nothing is random. Nothing is punishment from an angry universe. Everything arises from an intricate web of interconnected causes, most of which we can't see, stretching back through time in ways our limited minds can barely comprehend. This doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you're part of an elegant system where your actions matter, where causes you set in motion today will create effects tomorrow, where nothing is wasted, where even suffering can serve a purpose you don't yet understand. Tonight's stories will show you how different people discovered this truth in their own lives, how they found meaning in what seemed meaningless, how they learned to trust that even when they couldn't see the reason, there was a reason nonetheless. In a small coastal town in Oregon, there was a woman named Sarah who had always believed her life was cursed. Sarah was 38 years old, and when she looked back at her life, all she could see was a trail of disappointments and failures. She had been accepted to her dream college, but couldn't afford to go. She had fallen in love twice, and both relationships had ended painfully. She had worked for a company for 12 years, been promised a promotion multiple times, and then been laid off during restructuring. She had tried to start her own business, poured her savings into it, and watched it fail within 18 months. Sarah felt like the universe was against her, like no matter what she tried, fate conspired to knock her down. She would look at other people whose lives seemed to flow smoothly and wonder why she had been singled out for so much hardship. Sarah's best friend Monica had been listening to her catalogue these failures for years. Monica was patient and compassionate. But finally, one evening over dinner, she said something that surprised Sarah. Have you ever considered that maybe these things happened for a reason? That maybe there's a pattern you're not seeing? Sarah felt anger flash through her. What reason could there possibly be for all this pain? What pattern justifies losing everything I've worked for? Monica held up her hands. I'm not saying you deserved any of it. I'm saying that maybe these experiences were preparing you for something, teaching you something, steering you towards something you couldn't have found any other way. Sarah wanted to dismiss this as naive optimism, but something made her pause. Monica continued, I went to a Buddhist meditation class last week, and the teacher talked about karma and cause and effect. Not karma like cosmic punishment, but karma as this intricate web of causes and conditions. She said that everything that happens to us is the result of countless causes coming together, and everything that happens creates causes for future effects. Nothing is random. Nothing is wasted. Sarah felt skeptical but also curious. So all my failures were meant to happen? That doesn't make me feel better. Monica shook her head. Not meant to happen like some deity planned it, but happening as the natural result of causes and conditions, many of which you can't see, and creating conditions for whatever comes next. The teacher said that often we can't see the reason something happened until much later. Sometimes years later, when we look back and realize that thing we thought was a disaster was actually steering us toward exactly where we needed to be. Sarah went home that night, unable to stop thinking about what Monica had said. She lay in bed reviewing her life's disappointments, but this time trying to look at them differently. What if they weren't random bad luck? What if there was some pattern, some thread connecting them that she hadn't seen? She fell asleep, still pondering this question, and her dreams were vivid and strange, full of images of threads weaving together into a tapestry she couldn't quite see. The next morning, Sarah decided to attend the Buddhist class Monica had mentioned. She told herself she was just curious, that she didn't expect any answers. The class was held in a small community center, led by a teacher named Jack, who had practiced Buddhism for 30 years. That evening, Jack spoke about the law of karma, but not in the way Sarah had always understood it. Most people think karma means if you do bad things happen to you, like cosmic punishment. But that's not what the Buddha taught. Karma simply means action and consequence. Every action creates conditions for future experiences. Every experience is the result of past conditions. This isn't about punishment or reward. It's about cause and effect, as natural and impersonal as gravity. Jack continued, when something difficult happens to you, the Buddhist approach isn't to ask, why is the universe punishing me? It's to ask, what conditions led to this? What can I learn from this? What is this experience preparing me for? Sarah raised her hand, feeling vulnerable, but needing to ask. But what if you can't see any reason? What if it just feels like random suffering? Jack nodded with understanding. That's the hardest part. Often we can't see the reason in the moment. We're too close to it, too caught up in the pain. But Buddhism teaches that nothing is wasted. Every experience, especially difficult ones, is teaching us something, shaping us in some way, creating conditions for future growth we can't yet imagine. He shared a story from his own life. 20 years ago, I was a successful lawyer. I had money, status, everything I thought I wanted. Then I developed a chronic illness that forced me to give up my practice. I was devastated. I felt like my life was over. But being sick and unable to work gave me time to explore meditation and Buddhism, something I never would have done if I'd stayed healthy and busy. That illness, which seemed like the worst thing that ever happened to me, led me to a spiritual path that gave my life meaning I never had before. It took me years to see it, but that suffering had a purpose. Sarah felt something shift in her chest as she listened. She wasn't convinced that all her failures had secret purposes, but the idea intrigued her enough to keep coming back to the class. Over the following weeks, Jack taught them about Buddhist concepts of interdependence and interconnection. Nothing exists in isolation, he explained. Everything that happens is connected to everything else. You're not a separate self, having random experiences. You're part of an infinite web of causes and effects, influencing and being influenced by everything around you. He gave them an exercise to try at home. Pick one event in your life, something that seemed negative at the time. Then trace forward from that event. What happened because of it? What doors opened that wouldn't have opened otherwise? What did you learn that you later used? What connections did you make? Sometimes when we trace the effects, we start to see that the thing we thought was terrible actually set in motion a chain of events that led somewhere meaningful. Sarah decided to try this exercise with her business failure, the thing that still felt most painful and pointless. She had poured everything into a small bookstore, her dream since childhood. She had carefully curated the selection, created a warm community space, hosted author events and book clubs. For a while, it seemed to be working. But then a large chain bookstore opened nearby, and her customers dwindled. She tried everything to compete, went into debt trying to keep the doors open, but eventually had to close. She had felt like such a failure, had questioned every decision that led her to attempt something so risky. Now, sitting with Jack's exercise, Sarah tried to trace forward from that failure. What had happened because the bookstore closed? Well, she'd had to get a job quickly to pay off her debts. She'd ended up working at a non-profit that helped adults learn to read. It wasn't glamorous or well paid, but she'd found it surprisingly fulfilling. Through that job, she'd met David, a volunteer who had become one of her closest friends. David had introduced her to hiking, which had become her main form of exercise and stress relief. On a hiking trip, she'd met another woman named Claire, who was starting a mobile library project, bringing books to underserved communities. Claire had asked Sarah to help design the mobile library, to choose books, to think about how to create community in a van instead of a store. Sarah had said yes, thinking it would just be a small side project. But it had grown into something beautiful. They now had 3 mobile libraries serving rural areas and low-income neighborhoods. Sarah got to share her love of books with people who had never had easy access to a bookstore. She got to see children's faces light up when they found the perfect book. She got to help adults who were learning to read discover the joy of stories. Sarah sat with this realization, feeling tears forming. If her bookstore had succeeded, she never would have taken the non-profit job. She never would have met David or discovered hiking. She never would have met Claire or been part of the mobile library project. The failure that had felt so devastating, so pointless, had actually been the doorway to a life she loved far more than the one she'd been trying to build. Her failed bookstore had seemed like the end of her dream, but it had actually been the beginning of something better, something she never could have planned or imagined. The next week at the Buddhist class, Sarah shared this insight with the group. I always thought my bookstore failing was just bad luck, just the universe being cruel. But when I traced forward from that failure, I realized it led me to exactly where I am now, doing work I love with people I care about. If the bookstore had succeeded, I'd still be there, probably stressed about competition and profits, missing out on all the connections and experiences that failure made possible. Jack smiled with recognition. This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that we can't always see the web of interconnection. What looks like disaster in the moment might be redirection. What feels like the universe saying no might actually be the universe saying not this way. Try another path. Another person in the class, a man named Robert, spoke up. But how do you deal with it in the moment? When something terrible is happening, when you're in the middle of the pain, how do you trust that it's happening for a reason? Jack nodded. That's the practice. in the moment. You probably can't see the reason. You can't know yet what this is preparing you for. So you practice trust. You practice accepting that, even though you can't see the pattern, there is a pattern. Even though you can't see the purpose, there will be a purpose, even if it takes years to reveal itself. This trust doesn't make the pain disappear, but it helps you stay open instead of closing down in bitterness. He continued, Buddhism teaches that resistance to what is creates suffering. When something difficult happens and we fight with it, insist it shouldn't have happened, rage against the unfairness of it, we're adding our suffering to the pain. The pain is inevitable, but the suffering about the pain, the story that this is meaningless and shouldn't have happened, that's optional. When you can accept that this is happening, that it's part of the web of causes and conditions, that it will lead somewhere even if you can't see where yet, you release that extra layer of suffering. Sarah understood this intellectually, but she wondered if she could actually practice it when the next difficult thing happened. She didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 months later, Sarah was in a car accident. It wasn't her fault. Another driver had run a red light and hit her car on the passenger side. Sarah escaped with minor injuries, some bruising and whiplash, but her car was totaled. She was shaken and in pain, dealing with insurance companies and medical appointments, frustrated by the whole situation. Her first reaction was the old familiar one. Why is this happening to me? Why does everything always go wrong? But then she remembered Jack's teaching. She took a breath and tried a different approach. This happened. I can't change that it happened. I don't know yet what this is leading to, what purpose this will serve. But I'm going to trust that there is a purpose, even if I can't see it yet. This trust didn't make the pain go away or the insurance hassles disappear, but it changed something in how she related to the situation. Instead of spiraling into bitterness about her bad luck, she stayed present with what was actually happening, dealing with one thing at a time, staying curious about where this might lead. Because her car was totaled and she was waiting for the insurance settlement, Sarah had to rely on public transportation and rides from friends for several weeks. This was inconvenient, certainly, but it also meant she was walking more, taking buses, being more present in her community instead of isolated in her car. One morning, waiting at a bus stop, Sarah started talking to an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who was also waiting. Mrs. Chen mentioned she used to love reading but could no longer get to the library because of her mobility issues. Sarah immediately thought of the mobile library project. She got Mrs. Chen's address and arranged for one of the mobile libraries to add her neighborhood to the route. Mrs. Chen was so grateful that she started telling her friends. And soon, Sarah and Claire had a whole new community of elderly readers they were serving. These readers became some of their most loyal and enthusiastic participants, sharing books with each other, forming reading groups, giving Sarah and Claire feedback that helped improve the service. And it all started because Sarah's car was totaled and she ended up at that bus stop at that exact moment to meet Mrs. Chen. When Sarah shared this with Jack at the next class, he laughed with delight. This is the web of interdependence revealing itself. The accident that seemed like bad luck created conditions for you to meet someone who opened up a whole new dimension of your work. You couldn't have planned that. You couldn't have known. But it happened, as part of the natural unfolding of causes and conditions. Sarah was beginning to see her whole life differently, not as a series of random events, some good and some bad, but as an intricate tapestry where every thread mattered, where even the dark threads were part of creating the overall pattern. The college she couldn't afford had led her to a different school where she met Monica, her dearest friend. The relationships that ended had taught her things about herself she needed to learn, had shaped her in ways that made her capable of deeper connection later. The job loss had freed her from a career path that wasn't truly aligned with her purpose. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. It was all part of an elegant unfolding that she could only see in retrospect, looking backward at the path that had brought her here. One evening, Sarah was having dinner with Monica, the friend who had first suggested she explore Buddhism. Monica asked how the classes were going. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling emotion rise in her throat. "You changed my life when you invited me to that class. For years, I saw my life as a series of disasters. Now I'm starting to see it as a journey where even the detours had purpose. I don't know if I believe everything happens for a reason in some cosmic sense, but I'm beginning to trust that everything creates conditions for what comes next. Nothing is wasted." Monica reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. "I can see the difference in you. You seem lighter somehow, less bitter, more at peace." Sarah nodded. "I'm learning to trust the process, even when I can't see where it's going." Buddhism teaches that we're all part of this infinite web of causes and effects. What seems like chaos is actually intricate order. What feels like the universe being cruel might actually be the universe steering us toward exactly what we need, even if it takes years to understand why. She paused, then added, "The accident that totaled my car still sucked. The pain was real. The inconvenience was real. But because of that accident, I met Mrs. Chen, and now we're serving a whole community of elderly readers we never would have reached. The bookstore failing still hurt, but it led me here, to work I love. I'm learning that when something difficult happens, instead of immediately deciding it's terrible and meaningless, I can stay curious. What is this creating conditions for? What am I learning? Where is this leading? Even if I can't answer those questions yet, just asking them changes everything." This shift in Sarah's perspective didn't mean her life suddenly became easy or that difficult things stopped happening. But she had a different relationship to difficulty now. When challenges arose, she didn't immediately collapse into "why me" or "this is unfair." She could accept that this was happening, trust that it was part of a larger pattern she couldn't fully see, stay curious about where it might lead. She was learning to dance with life instead of fighting against it, to trust the process even when the destination was unclear. Sarah's story reveals something profound about how we understand the events of our lives. For years, she had looked at her disappointments as evidence that the universe was against her, that her life was cursed, that suffering was random and meaningless. But when she learned to trace the threads forward, when she practiced seeing how each apparent failure had created conditions for unexpected growth, her entire narrative changed. The bookstore that failed had seemed like the death of her dream, but it was actually the doorway to work she loved far more. Work that served people in ways a successful bookstore never could have. This is what Buddhism means when it teaches about the web of interdependence and the law of karma. Not karma as punishment, not as some cosmic accountant keeping score of your deeds, but karma as the simple truth that every action creates conditions. Every event arises from causes. Nothing happens in isolation. When something painful occurs, we have a choice in how we relate to it. We can see it as random cruelty, as evidence we're cursed or unlucky. Or we can stay curious about what this is creating conditions for, what this might be preparing us for, even if we can't see the answer yet. The practice isn't about pretending pain doesn't hurt or that loss isn't real. Sarah grieved her failed bookstore. She felt the pain of her broken relationships and her job loss, but she learned to hold that pain differently, to trust that even experiences that seem meaningless in the moment are part of a larger pattern that will reveal itself in time. Sometimes months later, sometimes years later, we look back and see clearly that thing we thought was a disaster was actually a redirection. That door that closed was steering us toward a door we didn't even know existed. This trust doesn't come easily. It's a practice, something we return to again and again when life brings us challenges we didn't choose and don't want. But the practice changes us. Instead of collapsing into bitterness when difficulties arise, we can stay open, stay curious, trust that there's a thread we can't yet see connecting this moment to future moments in ways our limited perspective can't grasp. We learn to ask, not why is this happening to me, but what is this teaching me? Where is this leading? What am I being prepared for? Take a gentle breath now and feel how your body relaxes when you release the fight with what is. When you stop insisting that your life should have gone differently, that painful things shouldn't have happened, that you deserved a smoother path. What if everything that happened, even the hard things, even the things that broke your heart, what if all of it was necessary? What if all of it was steering you, shaping you, preparing you for exactly where you are right now and for wherever you're going next? This same teaching about finding meaning in difficulty, about trusting the larger pattern even when we can't see it, reveals itself in countless ways across different lives and circumstances. This same teaching about finding meaning in difficulty, about trusting the larger pattern even when we can't see it, reveals itself in countless ways across different lives and circumstances. In Seattle, Washington, a man named Michael was about to discover this truth through a crisis that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his purpose. Michael was a cardiac surgeon, 42 years old, at the peak of his career. He was brilliant, dedicated, saved lives daily. Surgery was his calling, his identity, his purpose. Then one morning, Michael woke up with tremors in his right hand. At first, he thought it was just stress or fatigue, but the tremors persisted and worsened. Medical tests revealed he had developed a neurological condition that would progressively impair his fine motor control. Within months, maybe a year, he would no longer be able to perform surgery. Michael was devastated. Surgery wasn't just his job, it was who he was. He had spent his entire adult life training for this, perfecting his skills, saving lives. Without surgery, he didn't know who he was or what his life meant. He fell into a deep depression, barely able to function. His wife, Elena, watched him withdraw into himself, lost in grief for the life he was losing. She tried to comfort him, to remind him he was more than his career, but Michael couldn't hear it. He felt like his life was over at 42, like everything he'd worked for had been ripped away for no reason. Elena was a therapist who had studied Buddhist psychology. She had tried to share some of these teachings with Michael over the years, but he had always been too busy with surgery to be interested in what he considered abstract philosophy. Now, desperate to help him, she suggested he talk to her mentor, a Buddhist teacher named Tenzin, who had worked extensively with people facing life-altering diagnoses. Michael resisted at first. What could a Buddhist teacher tell him that would make losing his career okay? But Elena persisted gently. And finally, Michael agreed to one session. More to please her than because he expected it to help. Tenzin was a small, calm man in his 60s who had been a Buddhist monk for 30 years before leaving the monastery to teach in the West. He listened to Michael's story without judgment or platitudes. When Michael finished, voice breaking as he described his impending inability to operate, Tenzin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something unexpected. What if this isn't the end of your purpose? What if it's a redirection toward a purpose you haven't discovered yet? Michael felt anger flash. I already found my purpose. I save lives through surgery. That's what I'm meant to do. This disease is taking that away from me. Tenzin nodded. I understand that's how it feels. You've identified so completely with being a surgeon that losing that role feels like losing yourself. But Buddhism teaches that we are not our roles. We are not our abilities. These are things we do, not what we are. What you are is consciousness, awareness, a being capable of growth and change and finding new purposes when old ones end. Michael wanted to dismiss this as spiritual bypassing, as minimizing his very real loss. But something in Tenzin's calm presence made him pause. Tenzin continued, in Buddhism, we teach about impermanence. Everything changes. Every role we hold is temporary. Every ability we have is temporary. Every identity we construct is temporary. This isn't pessimistic. It's just true. The question isn't whether change will come. It's whether we'll fight with the change or allow it to transform us. He paused, letting this sink in. You're facing a profound change that you didn't choose and don't want. That's real. The grief is real. The loss is real. But beneath the question, why is this happening to me, is a deeper question. What is this preparing me for? Buddhism teaches that nothing happens in isolation. This diagnosis, painful as it is part of a larger web of causes and conditions. It will create effects you can't yet see. It's steering you towards something, even if you have no idea what yet. Michael felt tears forming. But I don't want to be steered towards something else. I want to keep doing surgery. That's where I make a difference. That's where I matter. Tenzin's voice was gentle. I understand. But wanting reality to be different than it is creates suffering. The Buddha's core teaching is that attachment to how we think things should be is the root of suffering. Your hands are developing tremors. That's reality. You will not be able to operate much longer. That's reality. You can spend your energy fighting with this reality, insisting it shouldn't be happening, raging against the unfairness. Or you can grieve what's ending while staying open to what might be beginning. Over the following weeks, Michael met with Tenzin regularly. Slowly, very slowly, Michael began to practice what Tenzin called accepting what is, while remaining curious about what comes next. He couldn't stop the tremors. He couldn't undo his diagnosis. But he could stop adding the layer of this shouldn't be happening on top of the pain. He could practice trusting that, even though he couldn't see the reason or the purpose, there was a pattern unfolding that was larger than his understanding. This didn't make the grief disappear. Michael still mourned the loss of surgery. But alongside the grief, there was now space for something else. Curiosity. If he wasn't going to be a surgeon, what was he going to be? What was this experience preparing him for? What purpose could he serve with hands that trembled? These questions felt impossible to answer, but asking them kept him from collapsing entirely into despair. One afternoon, Michael was at the hospital, preparing to tell his department chair that he needed to stop operating. It was one of the hardest conversations he'd ever had. Afterward, feeling raw and empty, he wandered the hospital hallways, not ready to go home yet. He found himself in the family waiting room outside the cardiac ICU, the same waiting room where families sat while he operated on their loved ones. There was a young woman there, maybe 25, crying quietly. Without thinking, Michael sat down near her. "Are you okay?" he asked, though it was obvious she wasn't. The woman looked up, wiping her eyes. "My dad's in surgery. Massive heart attack. They said he might not make it." Michael felt his chest tighten. How many families had sat in this exact spot, waiting while he worked to save their loved one? "What's his name?" Michael asked. James Patterson. He's only 52. He's supposed to walk me down the aisle next month." They sat together in silence for a while. Then Michael started talking, not as a surgeon, but as a human being who understood fear and uncertainty. He told her about the incredible skill of the surgical team, about the technology available, about reasons for hope without making promises he couldn't keep. He told her it was okay to be scared. That waiting was one of the hardest parts. That whatever happened, she would get through it because humans are far more resilient than we realize. The young woman seemed to relax slightly, grateful to have someone who understood, someone who could sit with her in the uncertainty. 3 hours later, the surgeon came out to report that James had survived and was stable. The young woman hugged Michael, thanking him for staying with her. Walking to his car afterward, Michael realized something profound. He had just spent 3 hours doing something he'd never had time for as a busy surgeon, being present with someone's fear, offering comfort that had nothing to do with technical skill, being a compassionate human presence during crisis. And it had felt meaningful in a way he hadn't expected. Maybe, he thought, maybe there was something here, some way to serve that didn't require steady hands. Over the following months, as Michael fully transitioned away from operating, he started spending more time with patients' families. He would sit in waiting rooms, offering presence and reassurance to people whose loved ones were in surgery. He started giving talks to medical students about the human side of medicine, about how to talk to families about difficult news, about remembering that patients and families are people in crisis, not just cases to solve. He developed a program to train surgeons in communication and compassion, skills that weren't emphasized in traditional medical education, but that made enormous difference to families navigating medical crises. One day, about a year after his diagnosis, Michael received an email from a surgical resident named Dr. Lisa Chen. She wrote, "Dr. Michael, I attended your talk on communicating with families last month. I want you to know it changed how I practice medicine. Yesterday, I had to tell a family their mother didn't survive surgery. Instead of just delivering the facts and leaving, I sat with them. I let them cry. I answered their questions with compassion instead of clinical detachment. They thanked me afterward. I said I made the worst day of their lives a little more bearable. I never learned this in medical school. Thank you for teaching me that being a good doctor isn't just about technical skill." Michael read this email 3 times, tears streaming down his face. He had spent 20 years performing brilliant surgeries. saving hundreds of lives. That work had mattered enormously. But this, teaching young doctors to see the humanity in their patients and families, creating a more compassionate medical culture, this was touching lives in a way surgery never had. He was reaching not just the patients he personally encountered, but every patient those doctors would ever treat, rippling out in ways he couldn't measure. That evening, Michael told Elena about the email. "You know what's strange? I spent a year grieving the loss of surgery, convinced my life was over, that this diagnosis had stolen my purpose. But the truth is, I found a purpose I never would have discovered if my hands hadn't started trembling. I was so focused on what I was losing that I couldn't see what I was being prepared for." Elena took his trembling hand in hers. "The Buddha teaches that we suffer when we cling to how we think things should be. You had to let go of being a surgeon before you could become what you're becoming now. A teacher, a bridge between the technical and the human. Someone who transforms medical culture from the inside." Michael nodded, thinking about Tenzin's question from a year ago. What if this isn't the end of your purpose, but a redirection toward a purpose you haven't discovered yet? At the time, that question had felt cruel, dismissive of his very real loss. But Tenzin had been right. The tremors that ended his surgical career had redirected him toward work that was equally meaningful, just different from what he'd planned. 2 years later, Michael published a book about the human side of medicine, about how to maintain compassion in a system that often prioritizes efficiency over empathy. The book became required reading in medical schools across the country. He received letters from doctors and patients alike, thanking him for putting words to something they'd always felt but couldn't articulate, that medicine is ultimately about human beings helping human beings through suffering, and that technical skill without compassion is incomplete. At a book signing, a doctor approached Michael. "I read that you can't operate anymore because of a neurological condition. I just want you to know that I think you're doing more good now than you ever could have done in the operating room. You're changing the entire culture of medicine. You're teaching thousands of doctors to be more human. That's going to touch millions of patients over decades." Michael felt overwhelming gratitude, not for the tremors themselves, which he would never have chosen, but for how life had worked with those tremors, how the ending of one purpose had created space for another purpose to emerge. Michael's story teaches us something essential about finding meaning in what seems like meaningless tragedy. When his hands began to tremble, it felt like cruel randomness, like the universe destroying his life for no reason. But looking back, he could see the intricate web of cause and effect. The diagnosis forced him out of surgery. Being unable to operate put him in waiting rooms where he'd never spent time before. Sitting with that young woman whose father was in surgery awakened something in him, showed him a need he could meet without steady hands. That experience led to teaching, which led to writing, which led to transforming medical education. If you had told Michael on the day of his diagnosis that this would all lead somewhere meaningful, he wouldn't have believed you. The pain was too fresh, the loss too devastating. But Buddhism teaches that we often can't see the purpose in the moment. We're too close to the pain, too identified with what we're losing. It's only later, sometimes years later, that we can look back and see clearly. That thing that seemed like disaster was actually redirection. That door that closed was steering us toward a door we didn't know existed. This doesn't mean we should pretend loss doesn't hurt or that we're glad terrible things happened. Michael still grieved his surgical career. He still wished his hands didn't tremble. But he learned to hold both truths simultaneously, this was a real loss. And this loss created conditions for unexpected growth. The tremors took something from him, and they also gave him something, not better or worse, just different. A purpose he couldn't have found any other way. Breathe slowly now and consider your own life. What loss or disappointment are you still fighting with? Still insisting shouldn't have happened? What door closed that you're still trying to force back open? What if that closed door was necessary? What if it was steering you towards something you can't yet see? You don't have to like what happened. You don't have to be grateful for the pain. But can you stay curious about where it might be leading? Can you trust that even though you can't see the pattern right now, there is a pattern unfolding? Buddhism teaches about what's called dependent origination, the idea that everything arises in dependence on causes and conditions. Nothing exists in isolation. Nothing happens randomly. Every experience is the result of an infinite web of causes stretching back through time. And every experience creates causes for future effects, stretching forward into a future we can't predict. When we truly understand this, when we really take it in, that we're part of this vast interconnected web, it changes how we relate to difficulty. We stop seeing ourselves as victims of random cruelty and start seeing ourselves as participants in an elegant dance of cause and effect. This understanding brings both humility and empowerment. Humility because we realize how little we actually control. How much of life unfolds according to patterns larger than our individual will. Empowerment because we realize that our actions matter, that the causes we set in motion today will create effects tomorrow, that we're constantly shaping our future through how we respond to the present. We can't control what happens to us, but we can control what we do with what happens to us. And that choice creates the conditions for everything that comes next. In a quiet suburb of Melbourne, Australia, a woman named Rebecca was learning this truth in the most painful way imaginable. Rebecca was 34 years old, married to her husband James for 8 years, and they had been trying to have a baby for the past 5 years. They had been through multiple rounds of IVF, 2 miscarriages, endless medical appointments, and emotional roller coasters that had nearly destroyed their marriage. Each failed attempt felt like a door slamming shut, like the universe saying no for reasons Rebecca couldn't understand. Rebecca had always wanted to be a mother. From childhood, she had imagined her future with children, had pictured the family she would create, the love she would give. Watching her friends have babies easily, seeing pregnancy announcements on social media, being surrounded by other people's children while her own arms stayed empty. It was agony. She felt broken, defective, cursed. Why was something that came so naturally to others impossible for her? What had she done to deserve this? Where was the meaning in this suffering? After the second miscarriage, Rebecca stopped going to family gatherings where children would be present. She stopped attending baby showers. She unfollowed friends on social media whose pregnancy announcements felt like daggers to her heart. She withdrew into her grief, into her sense of cosmic unfairness. James tried to support her, tried to suggest they could be happy without biological children, perhaps adopt or foster, but Rebecca couldn't hear it. She wanted her own child, wanted to experience pregnancy and birth. He wanted the specific future she had always imagined. Anything else felt like settling, like accepting defeat. One evening, Rebecca's sister, Emma, came to visit. Emma had 3 children and had always been sensitive about not flaunting her motherhood around Rebecca. But this evening, Emma said something that surprised Rebecca. "I know you're suffering. I know this isn't what you wanted. But have you ever considered that maybe you're not meant to have biological children? That maybe life is trying to steer you toward a different path? Rebecca felt rage flash through her. So I'm just supposed to accept that I'll never be a mother? Just give up on what I've always wanted? Emma held up her hands. I'm not saying give up. I'm saying maybe the path to motherhood for you isn't the path you expected. Maybe it's adoption or fostering. Maybe it's something else entirely. But you're so focused on the one way you think it has to happen that you're not seeing other possibilities. Rebecca wanted to argue, but something in her sister's words lodged in her chest. Was she so attached to how she thought motherhood should come that she was missing other doors opening? That night, unable to sleep, Rebecca searched online for information about adoption. She had always dismissed it before, seeing it as a consolation prize, not real motherhood. But as she read stories from adoptive parents, something shifted. They weren't settling. They were finding their children in unexpected ways. They were becoming parents through different means, and their love was no less real, their families no less complete. One woman wrote, I spent years trying to get pregnant, seeing my infertility as a tragedy. Now, I have my adopted daughter, and I can't imagine life without her. If I had gotten pregnant, I never would have found her. My infertility wasn't the universe saying no to motherhood. It was steering me toward the specific child who needed me. Rebecca read story after story, tears streaming down her face. She read about couples who had tried for years to conceive, then adopted children who transformed their lives in ways biological children never could have. She read about children who had been waiting for families, who needed love and stability, who found their forever homes through adoption. She read about the deep bonds between adoptive parents and children, bonds that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice, commitment, and love. The next morning, Rebecca brought up adoption with James. He was cautious at first. I'm worried she was only considering it out of desperation, that she would always see it as second best. But as they talked, Rebecca tried to articulate the shift that was happening in her. What if our infertility isn't a punishment or bad luck? What if it's steering us toward a child who needs us? A child we wouldn't find any other way. I've been so focused on what we don't have that I haven't been open to what we might have instead. They started attending adoption information sessions, learning about the process, meeting adoptive families. At one session, they heard from a social worker named Patricia, who specialized in placing older children, kids who had been in foster care for years, who were harder to place because they weren't babies, because they came with trauma and challenges. Patricia showed photos of some of the children waiting for families. One photo stopped Rebecca's heart. A girl, about 6 years old, with dark, curly hair and serious eyes. Her name was Sophie. The file said she had been in foster care since she was 2, had been in multiple placements, struggled with attachment and trust. Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about Sophie. That night, she told James, I keep imagining that little girl waiting for a family, being moved from home to home, not understanding why no one wants to keep her. What if we're meant to be her family? What if all these years of infertility were preparing us for her? James was quiet for a long moment, then said, let's find out more about her. They met with Patricia, learned about Sophie's background. Her biological mother had struggled with addiction and had her parental rights terminated. Sophie had been in 5 different foster homes, each placement ending because the family couldn't handle her behavioral issues. her testing of boundaries, her fear of attachment disguised as aggression. Patricia was honest with them. Sophie is a challenging child. She's been hurt, and she doesn't trust adults. She will push you away. She will test whether you really mean it when you say you want her. It won't be easy. Rebecca felt something fierce rise in her. We want to meet her. The first meeting with Sophie was awkward and painful. Sophie barely spoke, wouldn't make eye contact, radiated hostility and fear. But Rebecca saw past the defenses to the terrified child underneath. This little girl had been abandoned and rejected so many times. Of course, she was protecting herself. Of course, she was testing whether these new adults would leave her too. Over the following months, Rebecca and James visited Sophie regularly, building trust slowly, showing up consistently even when Sophie pushed them away. Rebecca read everything she could about attachment trauma, about how to parent a child who had been hurt by the adults who were supposed to protect her. She learned that love wasn't enough, that Sophie needed patience, consistency, understanding of why she behaved the way she did. 6 months later, Sophie moved in with them as a foster placement, with the goal of adoption if things went well. Those first months were brutal. Sophie would have meltdowns, would scream that she hated them, would destroy things, would try desperately to prove they would reject her like everyone else had. Rebecca remembered one night, about 2 months after Sophie moved in, when she was sitting on the floor outside Sophie's locked bedroom door. Sophie had barricaded herself inside after a tantrum, was screaming that Rebecca wasn't her real mother and never would be. Rebecca sat there crying, exhausted, wondering if she was strong enough for this. Then she remembered what Patricia had said. Sophie tests because she's terrified of being abandoned again. Every time you stay, every time you don't give up on her, you're showing her that you mean it, that she's worth staying for. Rebecca took a breath and spoke through the door. Sophie, I know you're scared. I know you think I'm going to leave you like everyone else did. But I'm not leaving. I'm sitting right here. I'll be here when you're ready to come out. I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. You're my daughter, and nothing you do will make me stop loving you. There was silence from inside the room. Then, so quietly, Rebecca almost missed it. Sophie said, "Promise? I promise." Rebecca said, "I chose you. I choose you every day. And I'm not going anywhere." Slowly, over many months, Sophie began to trust. The breakthrough came almost a year after she moved in. Sophie had come home from school upset because other kids had made fun of her for not having a real family. Rebecca found her crying in her room. Instead of the usual defensive anger, Sophie let Rebecca hold her while she cried. They said, "You're not my real mom because you didn't give birth to me." Sophie sobbed into Rebecca's shoulder. Rebecca held her tighter. "Sophie, look at me. I am your real mom. Not because I gave birth to you, but because I chose you. I wake up every day and choose to be your mom. That's more real than biology. You're my daughter. Forever. Nothing can change that." Sophie looked up at her with those serious dark eyes. "Even when I'm bad, even when I yell at you, even then," Rebecca said firmly. "Especially then. You can test me as much as you need to. I'm not going anywhere." Something shifted in Sophie's face. Some wall finally crumbling. "I love you, Mum," she whispered. It was the first time she had called Rebecca Mom without sarcasm or anger. Rebecca felt her heart crack open. "I love you too, sweetheart, so much." From that point forward, Sophie began to heal in ways that were visible and profound. She still had hard days, still struggled with trust and attachment, but the trajectory was clear. She was learning that she was safe, that she was wanted, that this family was permanent. She started doing better in school, made a few friends, began to relax in ways she never had before. Rebecca watched her daughter transform from a terrified, angry child into someone who could receive love, who could trust that good things wouldn't be taken away. 2 years after Sophie moved in, the adoption was finalized. In the courtroom, the judge asked Sophie if she wanted to be adopted by Rebecca and James. Sophie nodded solemnly. "Yes, they're my forever family." The judge smiled. "Then it's official. You're a family." Walking out of the courthouse, Sophie holding both their hands, Rebecca felt overwhelming gratitude, not for the infertility itself, which had been genuinely painful, but for how that pain had led her here, to this specific child who needed her, who she wouldn't have found any other way. That evening, Rebecca called her sister, Emma. "Remember when you asked if maybe I wasn't meant to have biological children? If maybe life was steering me toward a different path?" Emma's voice was warm. "I remember. You were furious with me." Rebecca laughed. "I was, but you were right. I spent years seeing my infertility as the universe saying no to motherhood. But it wasn't saying no. It was saying not that way. It was steering me toward Sophie, toward the exact child who needed the exact parent I could be. If I had gotten pregnant, I never would have adopted. Sophie would still be in foster care, still waiting for a family. My infertility had a purpose. It led me to my daughter." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's beautiful. Rebecca, you found meaning in something that seemed meaningless." Rebecca thought about this. Buddhism teaches that everything happens for a reason, right? That there's a web of causes and conditions. I think my infertility was part of that web. All those years of trying, all that pain, it was preparing me. It was teaching me patience, resilience, how to love a child who came to me in an unexpected way. Sophie needed a mom who could handle her trauma, who wouldn't give up when things got hard. Those years of infertility made me that mom. 3 years later, Rebecca was working as a volunteer with an organization that supported adoptive families, especially those who had adopted children with trauma histories. She shared her story with other families, helped them understand that behavioral challenges weren't rejection but testing, that patience and consistency could heal wounds that seemed unhealable. One evening, she was speaking to a support group of prospective adoptive parents. A woman raised her hand. "I've been trying to get pregnant for 6 years. I'm starting to look at adoption, but I'm scared I'll always see it as second best." "How did you get past that?" Rebecca took a breath, thinking about how to answer honestly. "I spent years in that same place, seeing adoption as settling, as what you do when you can't have what you really want. But here's what I learned. There's no such thing as second best when it comes to your child. Sophie is my daughter. She's not second best or a consolation prize. She's my kid, the one I was meant to parent. The path to her was different than I expected. But she's not less my daughter because I didn't give birth to her." She continued, "Buddhism teaches that we suffer when we cling to how we think things should be. I was clinging to biological motherhood so tightly that I couldn't see other possibilities. When I finally let go of that attachment, when I opened myself to a different path, I found my daughter, the one who needed me specifically, who I might have saved if I'm being honest, but who definitely saved me. The woman who had asked the question was crying now. Thank you. I needed to hear that. After the meeting, several people came up to Rebecca, thanking her for her honesty, for giving them hope that their infertility might lead somewhere meaningful, even if it wasn't where they expected. Walking to her car, Rebecca thought about the web of cause and effect that had brought her to this moment. Her infertility had led to adoption, which had led to Sophie, which had led to deep understanding of trauma and attachment, which had led to helping other families. Nothing was wasted. Even the pain had purpose. When she got home, Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table. She looked up when Rebecca came in. "How was the meeting, Mom?" Rebecca went over and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Good. I talked to some families who are thinking about adopting." Sophie nodded, then said something that made Rebecca's heart squeeze. "I'm glad you couldn't have a baby, because if you did, you wouldn't have adopted me, and I wouldn't have a family." Rebecca pulled Sophie into a hug. "I'm glad too, sweetheart. I'm glad life brought us to each other exactly the way it did." Rebecca's story reveals another dimension of how everything happens for a reason. For years, she saw her infertility as cruel randomness, as the universe denying her something she desperately wanted for no purpose. She couldn't imagine any reason good enough to justify that pain. But the reason wasn't something she could see in advance. It was Sophie, a specific child who needed a specific parent, who Rebecca would never have found if the path had been easy, if biological children had come naturally. The closed door of biological motherhood was actually steering her toward the open door of Sophie. This is how the web of cause and effect often works. We can't see the reason in the moment because the reason hasn't emerged yet. It's still unfolding, still forming, still moving toward us through time. The painful thing happening now is creating conditions for something in the future, something we can't predict or imagine. We have to trust the process even when we can't see where it's going. We have to stay open to unexpected doors even when the door we wanted slams shut. This doesn't mean infertility is good or that Rebecca should have been grateful for the pain. The pain was real. The grief was valid. Buddhism isn't asking us to pretend suffering doesn't hurt. It's asking us to trust that suffering isn't the end of the story, that it's creating conditions for whatever comes next, that nothing in the web of cause and effect is wasted or random. Every thread matters, even the dark ones, even the ones that felt like they were unraveling everything. Feel your breath moving slowly in and out, carrying you deeper into relaxation with each cycle. Notice how your body is growing heavier, more at ease, more ready for the deep rest you need. You don't have to figure anything out right now. You don't have to understand the purpose of your pain or see the pattern in your struggles. You can simply rest in the trust that there is a pattern, there is a purpose, even if it takes years to reveal itself. Even if you never fully understand it, the web of cause and effect is weaving something intricate and beautiful, and you're part of it. Sometimes the teaching that everything happens for a reason reveals itself not through finding something new but through losing something old, through endings that force new beginnings we would never have chosen. In Austin, Texas, a man named Christopher was about to learn this through a loss that would demolish his entire life as he knew it. Christopher was 51 years old. the founder and CEO of a tech company he had built from nothing over 25 years. The company was his baby, his identity, his legacy. He had poured everything into it: his time, his money, his relationships, his health. The company had gone through ups and downs, but Christopher had always managed to steer it through difficulties. Until the year when multiple problems converged. A major client went bankrupt, owing them millions. A key product launch failed spectacularly. A competitor released something better and cheaper. Their funding dried up. Within 6 months, Christopher watched his company collapse. They had to lay off everyone, declare bankruptcy, close the doors. 25 years of work, gone. His life's work, vanished. Christopher fell into a depression so deep his wife Lauren feared for his life. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't see any reason to get out of bed. He had identified so completely with being a successful entrepreneur that losing the company felt like dying. He was nobody now, he told himself. A failure, a has-been. Everything he'd built, everything he'd achieved. It meant nothing because it ended in failure. Lauren tried to help, tried to remind him that he was more than his company, that life could have meaning beyond business success. But Christopher couldn't hear it. The collapse of his company felt like the collapse of his entire existence. One afternoon, about 3 months after the company's collapse, Lauren came into their bedroom where Christopher had been lying in the dark. She sat on the edge of the bed and said quietly, "Chris, I'm worried about you. You need help. Professional help. This isn't just sadness. This is something deeper." Christopher wanted to tell her to leave him alone, but he didn't have the energy. Lauren continued, "I found a therapist who specializes in helping people through major life transitions. He practices something called Buddhist psychology. Will you at least talk to him?" Once, Christopher agreed. More to stop Lauren from worrying than because he thought it would help. The therapist's name was David, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and an unexpectedly direct manner. In their first session, Christopher explained what had happened, how his company had collapsed, how his life was over. David listened without the sympathy Christopher expected. When Christopher finished, David said something that surprised him. "So your company failed, and you've decided that means your entire life is meaningless. That's interesting." Christopher felt irritated. "It's not just interesting, it's true. I spent 25 years building something, and it's gone, wasted. I have nothing to show for it." David leaned forward slightly. "That's not true though, is it? You have 25 years of experience. You have skills you developed. You have relationships you built. You have lessons you learned. The company closed, but everything you gained from building it is still with you." Christopher shook his head. "What good is any of that when I failed? When everything I worked for ended in bankruptcy?" David was quiet for a moment, then asked a question that would change everything. What if the company's purpose wasn't to last forever? What if its purpose was to teach you what you needed to learn, to prepare you for what comes next, and then to end so you'd be free to move forward? Christopher felt anger flash. That's ridiculous. The purpose was to build a successful, lasting company. It failed. There's no hidden purpose in failure. David nodded. "I understand that's how it feels. But Buddhism teaches something different. It teaches that everything arises, exists for a time, and then passes away. This is true for companies, relationships, our own lives, everything. We build things knowing they're temporary, even if we don't consciously acknowledge that. Your company existed for 25 years. That's not nothing. It served whatever purpose it was meant to serve during that time. Now it's ended, and something else will begin. Christopher wanted to dismiss this as spiritual nonsense, but something in David's calm certainty made him pause. David continued, "In Buddhism, we have a teaching about impermanence. Everything changes. Everything ends. The question isn't whether your company would end. All companies end eventually, but whether you'll make peace with that ending or fight with it, making yourself miserable." He paused, then added, "Right now, you're fighting with reality. The reality is your company closed. Fighting with that fact doesn't change it. It just creates suffering on top of loss." Over the following weeks, Christopher began to explore these ideas in therapy. David taught him about the Buddhist concept of non-attachment, which Christopher initially misunderstood as not caring. "No," David explained, "non-attachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care deeply. You give your full effort, but you don't make your worth and happiness dependent on specific outcomes. You did your best with your company. Market conditions changed. Things beyond your control happened. The company closed. This doesn't mean you failed as a human being or that your life is meaningless." David gave Christopher an exercise. "I want you to write down everything you learned from building your company. Every skill you developed, every insight you gained, every way you grew. Not what you achieved or accomplished, what you learned." Christopher found this exercise surprisingly difficult. He had been so focused on external markers of success, revenue, employees, market share that he'd never thought about internal growth. But as he began to write, the list grew long. He had learned how to lead people, how to navigate conflict, how to make difficult decisions under pressure. He had learned resilience, creativity, strategic thinking. He had learned to manage his ego, to admit mistakes, to ask for help. He had learned about human nature from hiring hundreds of people, from building teams, from watching how people respond to challenge and opportunity. He had learned about his own limitations, his strengths and weaknesses, what mattered to him beyond money and status. The company might be gone, but all of this learning remained. He carried it with him. It was part of who he had become. When Christopher shared this list with David in their next session, David asked, "So did you waste 25 years? Or did you spend 25 years becoming someone with all these skills and insights?" Christopher felt tears forming. "I became someone different than I was. I grew, but it still feels like it should have led somewhere, should have resulted in something lasting." David nodded with understanding. "That's the attachment talking. You wanted a specific outcome, a lasting, successful company, and when you didn't get that outcome, you decided everything was wasted. But Buddhism teaches that the journey itself is the point, not the destination. You grew tremendously over 25 years. That growth is what mattered. The company was the vehicle for that growth, and now its job is done." Christopher sat with this teaching, trying to let it sink in. The idea that the company's purpose was his growth, not its perpetual existence, was both comforting and challenging. It meant nothing was wasted, that those 25 years had value even though they ended in bankruptcy. But it also meant letting go of his attachment to legacy, to building something that would outlast him, to being remembered as a successful entrepreneur. Could he make peace with that? Over the following months, as Christopher slowly emerged from his depression, something unexpected happened. People from his old company started reaching out. Former employees who wanted to thank him for what he had taught them, for the opportunities he had given them, for the culture he had created. One woman wrote, "Working at your company was the best professional experience of my life. You taught me to think creatively, to take calculated risks, to believe I could do more than I thought possible. I'm now running my own startup, and I use lessons I learned from you every day." Another former employee, a man named Marcus, who had been Christopher's first hire, called him, "Chris, I just wanted to tell you something. When the company closed, I was devastated. I'd been there for 20 years. But you know what I realized? You gave me 20 years of incredible professional growth. I learned more working for you than I could have learned anywhere else. Now I'm doing consulting, using everything you taught me. The company ending doesn't erase what we built or what we learned. It was real. It mattered." These conversations began to shift Christopher's perspective. The company had touched lives. It had provided learning and growth for many people beyond just himself. Even though it closed, even though it didn't last forever, its impact rippled outward in ways he could see now. His employees had taken what they learned and carried it into new ventures, new companies, new lives. The company's legacy wasn't a building or a brand name. It was people, changed people, grown people, people who were now doing their own meaningful work because of what they learned during their time with his company. 6 months after the company closed, Christopher received an unexpected phone call. It was from a business school professor named Dr. Ellen Martinez, who wanted to interview him for a case study about business failure and resilience. Most case studies focus on success stories, Dr. Martinez explained. But I think there's tremendous value in studying how people navigate failure, what they learn from it, how they move forward. Would you be willing to share your experience? Christopher's first instinct was to decline. Who wanted to be known for failure? But then he thought about David's teaching, about how growth matters more than outcomes, about how nothing is wasted. He agreed to the interview. Talking to Dr. Martinez, Christopher found himself articulating things he hadn't fully understood before. "I thought the company's purpose was to become a huge success, to go public, to be acquired, to build something lasting. But maybe its purpose was simpler, to teach me what I needed to learn, to help my employees grow, to serve our clients for the time we served them, and then to end, so we could all move on to whatever comes next." Dr. Martinez was taking notes rapidly. That's a remarkably healthy perspective for someone whose company just failed. Christopher smiled slightly. "It took me months of therapy and Buddhist teachings to get here. I was ready to give up on life when the company closed. But I'm learning that endings aren't failures. They're just transitions. The company served its purpose, and now it's done." The case study Dr. Martinez published became widely used in business schools. Students read about Christopher's company, not as a cautionary tale about what not to do, but as an example of how to navigate failure with grace, how to extract learning from loss, how to move forward when everything you build falls apart. Christopher started getting invited to speak at universities, at entrepreneurship conferences, at gatherings of business leaders. He would share his story openly, the success, the collapse, the depression, the slow rebuilding of his sense of purpose. He would teach what David had taught him, that we suffer when we attach our worth to outcomes we can't fully control, that growth matters more than lasting success, that endings create space for new beginnings. One evening after a talk, a young entrepreneur approached Christopher, clearly struggling with emotion. "My startup just failed. I'm feeling like my life is over. How did you get through it?" Christopher looked at this young man who reminded him so much of himself 6 months ago. "First, let yourself grieve. The loss is real. Don't pretend it doesn't hurt. But while you're grieving, stay curious about what this experience is teaching you, what it's preparing you for. Your company's purpose might not have been to last forever. Its purpose might have been to teach you what you needed to learn so you'd be ready for whatever comes next." The young entrepreneur nodded, wiping his eyes. "But what do I do now? I don't know who I am if I'm not running a company." Christopher understood this completely. That's the question I had to answer too. And here's what I learned. You're not what you do. You're not your company or your role or your achievements. Those are just temporary forms your life takes. What you are is consciousness, awareness, a being capable of growth and learning and creating meaning. That doesn't change when your company closes or your circumstances shift. He continued, "Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent. Your company, my company, Apple, Google, they'll all end eventually. Some sooner, some later. The question isn't whether things will end, but whether we'll make peace with that impermanence. Whether we can build things, love things, create things while knowing they won't last forever. That's actually what makes them precious, their temporariness." The young man seemed to consider this. "So you don't regret the company, even though it failed?" Christopher thought carefully before answering. "I regret things I could have done differently, business decisions that were mistakes. But do I regret the 25 years I spent building it? No. Those years shaped me. They taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. The company's closing doesn't erase that value." 2 years after his company closed, Christopher started a new venture, but this one was different. Instead of building another tech company, he created a non-profit that helped entrepreneurs navigate business failure. He offered counseling, resources, community for people whose companies had closed, who were struggling with the shame and grief of failure. He brought in therapists, business advisors, other entrepreneurs who had been through it. He created what he wished had existed when his own company collapsed. The non-profit grew quickly. There was enormous demand for this kind of support. Christopher discovered so many entrepreneurs struggling in silence, believing they were alone in their failure, carrying shame about something that's actually quite common. Christopher's openness about his own experience gave others permission to be open about theirs. One day, Christopher was leading a support group for entrepreneurs whose companies had recently closed. A woman named Jennifer was sharing her story, crying as she described watching her business fail despite her best efforts. "I keep asking why," Jennifer said. "Why did this happen? What did I do wrong? What's the universe trying to tell me?" Christopher understood that question intimately. Buddhism teaches that we suffer when we need to know why, when we insist that difficult things must have clear reasons we can understand. But sometimes the reason won't reveal itself for years. Sometimes we never fully understand it. The practice is learning to trust that there is a pattern, There is a web of cause and effect, even when we can't see it. He continued, when my company failed, I thought my life was over. I couldn't imagine any reason good enough for that pain. But now, 2 years later, I can see some of the threads. The company closing freed me to do this work, to help other entrepreneurs in ways I never could have if I was still running my business. I learned things through failure that I never learned through success: humility, resilience, compassion for others struggling. My failure had purpose, even though I couldn't see it at the time. Jennifer looked up at him. So you think my failure has purpose too, even though I can't see it? Christopher nodded. I think it's creating conditions for whatever comes next in your life. I think you're learning things right now that you'll use in ways you can't predict. I think this ending is making space for a beginning you can't yet imagine. That's what Buddhism means by everything happening for a reason, not that some deity planned your suffering, but that your suffering is part of a web of causes and effects that will lead somewhere, even if you can't see where yet. Christopher's story teaches us about impermanence and purpose, about how endings aren't failures, but transitions, about how what seems like meaningless loss can actually be redirection toward purpose we haven't discovered yet. For 25 years, Christopher believed his purpose was building a successful company. When that company failed, he thought he had lost his purpose. But actually, the company's purpose was preparing him for his real work, helping other entrepreneurs navigate failure with grace and wisdom. If his company had succeeded, had gone public, or been acquired, he would never have found this calling. The failure that seemed to destroy his purpose actually revealed his purpose. This is the paradox Buddhism asks us to hold. Nothing lasts forever, and yet everything matters. Your work matters even though it will end. Your relationships matter even though they'll change. Your life matters even though it's temporary. The impermanence doesn't negate the meaning. It actually creates the meaning. Because time is limited. Because things don't last forever. Every moment is precious. Every connection significant. Every experience worth having fully. Breathe slowly and deeply now, feeling your body completely supported, completely at rest. You're sinking deeper with each breath, deeper into relaxation, deeper into trust that your life is unfolding exactly as it needs to unfold. Even the difficult parts, even the losses and disappointments, they're part of the pattern, part of the web, part of steering you toward where you need to be. Sometimes, the teaching that everything happens for a reason comes not through our own experiences, but through witnessing someone else's journey, through seeing how their path unfolds in ways that seem impossible until they happen. In Vancouver, Canada, a woman named Jennifer was watching her best friend Emma go through something that looked, from the outside, like complete disaster. Emma had been a professional dancer, performing with a prestigious contemporary dance company. Dance wasn't just Emma's career, it was her entire identity, her reason for existing, her language for understanding the world. She had trained since childhood, sacrificed relationships and opportunities to pursue dance at the highest level. At 32, she was at her peak, performing lead roles, receiving critical acclaim, living her dream. Then, during a performance, Emma landed wrong from a jump. She felt something tear in her knee, heard a pop that the audience probably heard too. She finished the performance on adrenaline, but by the time she got backstage, her knee had swollen to twice its normal size. The diagnosis was devastating. Torn ACL, torn meniscus, significant cartilage damage. She would need surgery and months of rehabilitation. But even with the best possible outcome, even if everything healed perfectly, she would never dance professionally again. Not at the level she had been dancing. Not with the company. Her career was over at 32. Jennifer watched Emma receive this news and saw something break in her friend that went deeper than the knee injury. Emma's whole sense of self shattered. Without dance, she didn't know who she was. Without the stage, she didn't know what her life was for. The months after the injury were dark. Emma went through surgery, started physical therapy, but she was going through the motions mechanically, her spirit completely absent. She barely spoke. She would sit in her apartment staring at the wall for hours. Jennifer tried everything to reach her, bringing food, offering to help with errands, just sitting with her in silence. But Emma was unreachable, lost in a grief so profound it was like she had died, even though her body was still alive. One afternoon, about 4 months after the injury, Jennifer came to Emma's apartment and found her crying on the floor, surrounded by old performance videos. "I can't do this anymore," Emma sobbed. "I don't know how to be alive when I can't dance. Everything I was, everything I worked for, it's gone. What's the point of existing like this?" Jennifer was frightened by the despair in Emma's voice. She called Emma's therapist, who came over and talked Emma through the immediate crisis. But afterward, the therapist pulled Jennifer aside. "Your friend is in serious trouble. This isn't just grief over losing dance. She's lost all sense of meaning and purpose. If we can't help her find a reason to live beyond dance, I'm worried about what might happen." Jennifer felt helpless. How could she help Emma find meaning when dance had been Emma's entire meaning? That evening, Jennifer was scrolling through social media, looking for anything that might give her ideas for helping Emma. She came across a post from a dance teacher named Maria who worked with disabled children, using adaptive dance techniques to help kids with physical challenges experience the joy of movement. The post showed a video of a girl with cerebral palsy, her movements jerky and uncoordinated by conventional standards, but her face radiating pure joy as she moved to music. Jennifer watched the video 3 times, something stirring in her chest. What if this was what Emma needed to see? That dance could exist in forms she'd never considered. That movement and expression weren't limited to professional stages and perfect technique. She showed the video to Emma the next day. Emma barely glanced at it. "That's not dance. That's just moving around." Jennifer felt frustration flash through her. Why not? She's moving to express herself. She's finding joy in her body. Isn't that what dance is really about? Emma's face hardened. Real dance requires technique, precision, years of training. This is sweet, but it's not dance. Jennifer took a breath, trying to stay patient. "Emma, I know you've lost professional dance. I know that's devastating. But what if there are other ways to connect with dance? Other ways to share what you love about movement with people who need it?" Emma shook her head. "I'm not interested in teaching disabled kids to flail around. That's not dance. It's pity." Jennifer left, feeling defeated. She had thought the video might spark something in Emma, might show her a path forward. But Emma was so attached to her narrow definition of dance that she couldn't see other possibilities. 2 weeks later, Jennifer got a call from Maria, the adaptive dance teacher whose video she'd seen. Maria had somehow heard about Emma's injury and wanted to reach out. "I don't know if your friend would be interested," Maria said, "but I'm looking for someone to help develop a new program for teens with mobility challenges. I thought someone with professional dance experience could bring something valuable." Jennifer hesitated. Emma had made it clear she wasn't interested in adaptive dance, had actually been dismissive of it. But something made Jennifer give Maria Emma's contact information anyway. What was the worst that could happen? Emma would say no, and they'd be exactly where they were now. Maria called Emma that evening. Emma later told Jennifer that her first instinct was to hang up, to tell this woman she wasn't interested in charity work with disabled kids. But something in Maria's voice stopped her. Maria wasn't asking for pity or offering pity. She was asking for Emma's expertise, treating Emma like she still had something valuable to contribute. "I don't know anything about teaching," Emma told Maria. "I've only ever performed." Maria's response surprised her. "That's exactly why I need you. I know teaching. I know adaptive techniques. But I don't have your level of artistic understanding, your experience with professional choreography, your knowledge of how to create something beautiful from movement. These kids deserve more than just moving around. They deserve real dance, adapted to their abilities, but still artistically meaningful." Emma felt something stir in her chest, something that had been dead since the injury. The idea that she might still have something to offer, that her decades of training might still matter, even if she couldn't perform anymore. She agreed to meet with Maria, telling herself it was just to be polite, that she'd explain why she wasn't the right person for this. But when she arrived at Maria's studio and saw the space mirrors, bars, music, the familiar smell of a dance studio, something in Emma broke open. She had been avoiding anything dance-related since the injury, couldn't bear to be around what she'd lost. But being in this space, it wasn't painful the way she expected. It was like coming home to a place she thought she'd lost forever. Maria introduced Emma to some of the students, teenagers with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, limb differences, various conditions that affected their mobility. Emma's first instinct was still to see what they couldn't do, how their bodies couldn't execute standard technique. But then Maria put on music and asked the students to improvise, to move however their bodies wanted to move. And Emma saw something that stunned her. These kids, moving in ways professional dancers never would, in ways that broke every rule Emma had learned, were expressing something real, something honest, something that maybe was more essentially dance than the perfectly executed technique she'd spent her life pursuing. One girl, about 16, with cerebral palsy that made her movements jerky and unpredictable, was moving to a slow piece of music. She couldn't do a releve or an arabesque or any of the moves Emma knew. But the way she was using her body to express the emotion of the music, the way her face showed what she was feeling, on the absolute presence she brought to the movement, it was more honest, more real than many professional performances Emma had seen. Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Not from grief this time, but from recognition. This was dance. Not the form she'd known, but the essence, the soul of it. After the class, Maria asked Emma what she thought. Emma couldn't speak for a moment, emotions overwhelming her. Finally, she said, "I was wrong. I thought dance was about perfect technique, about bodies that could execute difficult moves flawlessly. But these kids showed me something else. They showed me that dance is about using whatever body you have to express whatever you're feeling. That's what I loved about it all along. Underneath the technique and the performance, the expression, the truth of it. Maria smiled with understanding. So, will you help me develop the team program? Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Over the following months, Emma threw herself into this new work with an intensity that surprised even her. She studied adaptive techniques, learned about different conditions and what they made possible or impossible. I figured out how to translate her deep understanding of choreography into forms that worked for bodies that moved differently than trained dancers' bodies. She discovered she had a gift for this, could see possibilities others missed, could adapt complex choreographic ideas into forms accessible to students with significant physical challenges. But more than her technical skills, Emma brought something else to the work. She brought her own experience of loss, of having a body that no longer did what she wanted it to do, of having to redefine her relationship to movement. Her students could sense this. They knew she understood what it felt like when your body was an obstacle instead of an instrument. One student, a girl named Chloe, who had been in a wheelchair since a car accident at age 12, said to Emma one day, "You get it. You understand what it's like to lose the body you thought you'd have. Most teachers try to be nice about it, but you actually understand." Emma felt her throat tighten. She did understand. Her injury had forced her into the same territory these students lived, in the gap between what you want your body to do and what it actually can do. That gap had felt like the end of everything when it was just about her loss. But now, it was a bridge, a shared experience that let her connect with these students in ways a teacher who had never experienced physical limitation couldn't. 6 months into working with Maria's program, Emma choreographed a piece for the teenage students to perform. It was unlike anything she had created before, built around their actual abilities and limitations, incorporating wheelchairs and crutches and braces as part of the choreography. Using adaptive techniques she developed specifically for their bodies. The piece was about transformation, about how endings can be beginnings, about how loss can crack you open to something new. Emma worked with her students to help them express these themes through movement that honored what their bodies could do rather than focusing on what they couldn't. On the night of the performance, Jennifer sat in the audience watching her best friend who 6 months ago had wanted to die because she couldn't dance anymore, standing in the wings coaching these teenage dancers. The lights went down, the music started, and Emma's students took the stage. What Jennifer witnessed over the next 15 minutes changed how she understood beauty and art and dance and everything. These students, moving in ways that would never be considered technically correct, that would never pass any traditional standard of excellence, were creating something profoundly beautiful. Not beautiful despite their limitations, but beautiful because of how they worked with those limitations, how they found expression within constraint, how they brought absolute truth to every movement their bodies could make. The audience was silent, transfixed, and when the piece ended, when the students took their bows, the applause was thunderous. People were crying, not from pity, but from being genuinely moved by what they'd witnessed. Backstage afterward, Emma was surrounded by her students, all of them talking excitedly, high on the performance. Chloe wheeled over to Emma. "That was the best night of my life. I never thought I could dance. I never thought I could create something beautiful. You showed me I could." Emma knelt down so she was eye level with Chloe. "You showed me something too. You showed me that dance isn't about perfect technique. It's about truth and expression and using whatever body you have to share what's inside you." I thought I knew that after 20 years of professional dance, but I didn't really understand it until I started working with you. Later that night, Jennifer and Emma sat in Emma's apartment, drinking tea and processing the evening. Emma was different than she'd been 6 months ago, lighter, more present, genuinely happy in a way Jennifer hadn't seen since before the injury. "I need to tell you something," Emma said quietly. "When I first got injured, I wanted to die. I'm not being dramatic. I genuinely couldn't see any reason to keep living if I couldn't dance professionally. It felt like the universe had taken everything that mattered." Jennifer nodded. She remembered those dark months vividly. Emma continued, "But now, after tonight, after working with these students, I can see something I couldn't see then. The injury didn't take dance from me. It redirected me toward a different kind of dance, a different relationship with movement. If I'd kept performing, I never would have found this work. I would have kept chasing perfect technique, perfect performances, external validation. I might have danced for another 10 years and then retired without ever understanding what dance really is." She paused, tears forming. "These students taught me more about dance in 6 months than I learned in 20 years of professional training. They taught me that dance is about expression, about using your body to tell truth, about finding joy and meaning in movement, regardless of whether that movement meets some external standard of correctness. I'm a better dancer now than I was before the injury, even though I can barely walk without a limp, because now I understand what dance actually is." Jennifer reached over and squeezed Emma's hand. "Do you remember when I showed you that video of Maria's student, the girl with cerebral palsy? You said that wasn't real dance." Emma laughed through her tears. "I remember. I was so stuck in my narrow definition of what dance had to be, so attached to technique and perfection that I couldn't see other possibilities. That attachment was causing me so much suffering. When I finally let it go, when I could see dance in a broader way, everything opened up." She wiped her eyes. "Buddhism teaches that everything happens for a reason, right? That there's a web of causes and conditions connecting everything. I think my injury happened so I could find this work, so I could help these students, so I could learn what dance really is. If someone had told me that on the day I tore my knee, I would have told them to go to hell. The pain was too fresh. The loss was too raw. But now, a year later, I can see it. The injury that seemed to destroy my purpose actually revealed my purpose." 2 years later, Emma's adaptive dance program had grown significantly. She was training other teachers in her techniques, traveling to different cities to lead workshops, writing a book about adaptive choreography. The professional dance world that had seemed like everything to her now felt like preparation, like necessary training for the work she was actually meant to do. She still had moments of grief for what she'd lost. Watching professional performances could still be bittersweet. But the grief was no longer consuming. It existed alongside gratitude for what she'd found. One evening, Emma was giving a keynote speech at a conference for dance educators. She spoke about her journey from injury to adaptive dance, about what her students had taught her, about how loss had redirected her toward purpose she couldn't have imagined. After the speech, a young dancer approached her, visibly upset. "I just found out I have a degenerative condition. In a few years, I won't be able to dance anymore. I don't know how to keep living knowing that's coming." Emma's heart broke for this young woman who was where Emma had been 2 years ago. She took the dancer's hands. "I know how terrifying that is. When I got injured, when I I learned I'd never perform again. I wanted to die. I couldn't imagine life without dance. But what I learned is that dance isn't just one thing. It's not just professional performance. It's expression. It's movement. It's using your body to communicate what words can't say. You won't lose dance. You'll lose one form of dance and find another. The young dancer was crying now. But how do you accept that? How do you make peace with losing what you love most? Emma thought carefully before answering. You don't make peace with it all at once. You grieve what you're losing. That grief is real and important. But underneath the grief, you practice trusting that this is steering you somewhere, even if you can't see where yet. You practice believing that your loss will create space for something new, something you can't predict or imagine. It's not easy, but it's the only way through. Emma's story reveals how what seems like cruel fate, an injury that destroys a career, can actually be redirection toward purpose we never would have discovered otherwise. For 20 years, Emma believed her purpose was professional performance. The injury that ended that career felt like the death of her purpose. But actually, professional dance had been preparation. It had given her the deep understanding of movement and choreography that she now used in entirely new ways. Her true purpose wasn't performing for audiences of strangers. It was teaching students who needed what she uniquely could offer, someone who understood both professional-level dance and the experience of physical limitation. If Emma had never been injured, she would have kept performing, probably until her body aged out of professional dance in her late 30s or early 40s. She might have become a conventional dance teacher, working with able-bodied students on traditional technique. She never would have discovered adaptive dance, never would have found these students, never would have learned what her students taught her about the essence of dance. The injury that seemed to destroy everything actually revealed everything. It cracked open her narrow understanding of dance and of purpose, forcing her to discover something deeper and more meaningful than what she'd lost. This is what Buddhism means when it teaches that everything happens for a reason. Not that some cosmic force deliberately injured Emma to teach her a lesson, but that the injury, like everything that happens, was part of a web of causes and conditions that led somewhere. It created effects, opened doors, steered Emma towards students and work and understanding she never would have found on her original path. The reason wasn't visible in the moment of injury. It revealed itself slowly, over months and years, as Emma moved through grief into curiosity, into discovery, into purpose. Breathe deeply and slowly now, feeling how your whole body has relaxed into this rest, how your mind has quieted, how you're drifting peacefully between waking and sleeping. You don't need to hold on to these stories consciously. They're working on you at deeper levels, settling into your understanding in ways you don't need to track or manage. Just rest. Just receive. Just trust that whatever you need from these teachings is already finding its way into you. Consider your own life now, the disappointments and losses you've experienced, the doors that closed, the plans that failed, the dreams that didn't materialize the way you hoped. What if those weren't random cruelties? What if they were redirections, steering you away from paths that weren't actually yours toward paths you couldn't have imagined? You can't see the full pattern yet. You're too close to it, too much inside your own life. But what if there is a pattern? What if every closed door was making space for a door you didn't know existed? This teaching doesn't ask you to be grateful for pain or pretend loss doesn't hurt. Sarah grieved her failed bookstore. Michael grieved his surgical career. Rebecca grieved her infertility. Christopher grieved his company. Emma grieved professional dance. The grief was real and necessary. Buddhism isn't about bypassing grief or pretending everything is fine. It's about holding grief while staying open to what comes next. Trusting that this ending is creating space for a beginning you can't yet see. The web of cause and effect is vast and intricate beyond our comprehension. Every choice you make creates ripples that affect countless other lives in ways you'll never know. Every experience you have shapes you in ways you won't fully understand for years. Every person you meet, every place you go, every challenge you face, it's all connected in this elaborate dance of causes and conditions. Nothing is random. Nothing is wasted. Everything is steering you, shaping you, preparing you for whatever unfolds next. In Dublin, Ireland, there was a woman named Catherine who was about to discover this truth through what seemed, on the surface, like the most trivial of accidents. Catherine was a graphic designer, successful and busy, always rushing from one project to the next. One rainy Tuesday morning, she was hurrying to catch a bus to an important client meeting. She was running late, trying to answer emails on her phone while walking, not paying attention to where she was going. She stepped off the curb without looking and twisted her ankle badly on the uneven pavement. Catherine went down hard, her laptop bag flying, her phone skittering across the wet ground. Pain shot through her ankle. People rushed to help her up. But when she tried to stand, she couldn't put any weight on her left foot. Someone called an ambulance. Catherine sat on the wet curb, humiliated and frustrated, her ankle swelling rapidly. This was going to ruin her day, possibly her week. She had that client meeting, 3 deadlines coming up, no time for an injury. At the hospital, X-rays revealed a severe sprain, but no break. The doctor wrapped her ankle, gave her crutches, and told her to stay off it for at least 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Catherine felt panic rising. She couldn't afford to be immobile for 2 weeks. She had work to do, clients to meet, projects to complete. But the doctor was firm. If you don't rest it properly now, you'll do permanent damage. 2 weeks off the ankle, minimal walking, keep it elevated. No exceptions. Catherine went home, defeated, angry at herself for being careless, furious at the universe for this terrible timing. She called her clients, rescheduled meetings, warned her team she'd be working from home. She set up a workspace on her couch, laptop balanced on her knees, injured ankle propped on pillows. This was going to be the worst 2 weeks. But something unexpected happened during those first few days of forced stillness. Catherine, who was always in motion, always busy, always on to the next thing, had to slow down. She couldn't rush around her apartment. She couldn't run to meetings. She couldn't fill every moment with frantic activity. She had to sit, be still, rest. At first, this stillness was torture. Catherine's mind raced with everything she should be doing, everywhere she should be. But after a few days, something shifted. The frantic energy began to settle. She started noticing things she never noticed in her usual rush. How light moved through her apartment during different times of day. How the rain sounded against her windows. How her cat Milo would curl up beside her for hours. Something he never got to do and she was always rushing around. One afternoon during the second week of recovery, Catherine was working on a design project when she realized something disturbing. She had been designing corporate websites and marketing materials for years, and she was good at it, successful at it, but she didn't love it. Somewhere along the way, design had become just a job, just a way to make money. She had stopped creating things that excited her, stopped taking on projects that challenged her creatively. She'd been so busy chasing the next client, the next deadline, that she'd lost connection with why she became a designer in the first place. This realization hit her with unexpected force. When had that happened? When had she traded creative passion for financial security? When had she stopped caring about the work itself and started caring only about getting it done efficiently? Catherine sat with this uncomfortable awareness, unable to distract herself by rushing to the next thing the way she usually would. Her injured ankle had forced her into stillness, and in that stillness, truths she'd been out running for years were catching up with her. That evening, Catherine dug through old portfolio boxes she hadn't opened in years. She found design work from her university days, experimental, playful, creative pieces that took risks and broke rules. She found sketches for a children's book she'd started illustrating 8 years ago and abandoned when she got too busy with client work. She found notes for a graphic novel she'd dreamed of creating. Looking at these old projects, Catherine felt grief for the creative person she used to be, the artist she'd traded away for commercial success. Catherine's best friend Siobhan came to visit that weekend, bringing groceries and concern for Catherine's ankle. Siobhan found Catherine surrounded by old portfolio pieces, crying, "What's wrong? Is your ankle worse?" Catherine shook her head. "My ankle's fine. I'm crying about my life. Look at this work. Look at what I used to create. When did I stop being an artist and become just a commercial designer churning out corporate websites?" Siobhan sat down beside her, looking through the old pieces. "These are beautiful. Kat, why did you stop?" Catherine tried to explain. "I needed to make money. Client work pays better than experimental projects. I got busy, got successful, and somewhere in all that busyness, I lost myself." Siobhan was quiet for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Maybe that's why you hurt your ankle. Maybe you needed to be forced to stop running long enough to notice what you'd lost." Catherine wanted to dismiss this as silly mysticism, but something about it rang true. She had been running, literally and figuratively, for years. Running from meeting to meeting, from deadline to deadline, never stopping, never reflecting, never questioning whether the path she was on was actually where she wanted to be going. The twisted ankle, this forced pause, it had created space for awareness she'd been avoiding. Over the following week, as her ankle continued to heal, Catherine started sketching again. Not for clients, not for money, just for herself. She pulled out that children's book she'd abandoned and looked at it with fresh eyes. The story was still good. The illustrations she'd started were charming. Why had she stopped working on it? She knew why. It wasn't profitable. It wouldn't lead anywhere. It was a waste of time when she could be doing paid work. But sitting there with her injured ankle elevated, finally still enough to feel what she actually wanted, Catherine realized those were terrible reasons to abandon something she loved. What was the point of financial success if she'd sacrificed the creative work that gave her joy? She decided to finish the children's book. Not for publication, not for profit, just to complete something she'd started, to honor the creative impulse that had been trying to speak through her 8 years ago. She worked on it every evening after finishing her client work, rediscovering the pleasure of creating something purely for the love of creating it. 6 weeks later, when her ankle had fully healed, Catherine had finished the book. 48 pages of illustrations and story about a small bird learning to navigate the world after leaving the nest. Looking at the completed work, Catherine felt more proud than she'd felt about any commercial project in years. This was real. This was hers. This came from somewhere authentic inside her. Siobhan looked at the finished book and insisted Catherine submit it to publishers. Kat, this is genuinely good. Not just good for something you did for fun. Professionally good. You should try to get it published. Catherine felt the old resistance rising. It wasn't good enough. Publishers would reject it. It was safer to keep it private. But something had shifted during those weeks of forced stillness. She had started listening to a different voice inside, one that valued creative authenticity over commercial success. She submitted the book to 5 publishers, expecting rejections, preparing herself to accept that this book was just for her. 3 months later, she got an offer. A children's book publisher loved the work and wanted to publish it. They offered an advance that wasn't life-changing, but was meaningful. More importantly, they wanted to discuss future books, a possible series. Catherine sat, staring at the email, stunned. A publisher wanted her book, wanted more books, wanted to work with her on a series. This project she'd only started because a twisted ankle forced her to slow down. This creative work she'd abandoned years ago and only returned to during weeks of forced stillness. It was going to be published. Real people would read it. Real children would experience the story and illustrations she'd created from a place of genuine creative joy rather than commercial obligation. That evening, Catherine called Siobhan. "Remember when you said maybe I hurt my ankle so I'd be forced to stop running? I thought you were being mystical and silly. But maybe you were right. If I hadn't twisted my ankle, I never would have slowed down enough to realize how disconnected I'd become from creative work I love. I never would have finished the children's book. I never would have submitted it. That stupid accident that seemed like such terrible timing. It actually redirected my entire life." Siobhan laughed warmly. The universe works in mysterious ways. Catherine thought about this. She didn't know if she believed the universe had deliberately caused her to hurt her ankle, but she could see clearly how that accident had created conditions for profound change. The injury forced stillness. Stillness created space for reflection. Reflection revealed how far she drifted from her authentic, creative path. That awareness led to completing the children's book. The completed book led to publication and a new creative direction she never would have pursued otherwise. Over the following year, Catherine made significant changes to her work life. She reduced her client load, taking only projects that genuinely interested her creatively. She spent half her time on commercial work that paid the bills and half her time on creative projects that fed her soul. She finished 2 more children's books for the series her publisher wanted. Her income went down, but her satisfaction went up exponentially. She was creating work she was proud of. Work that came from authentic creative impulse rather than just commercial obligation. One day, Catherine was in a bookshop and saw her published book on the shelf. She watched a mother and daughter browsing the children's section, saw the girl pick up Catherine's book, saw her eyes light up at the illustrations. The mother bought the book, and Catherine followed them out of the shop, wanting to tell them she was the author, but holding back. Instead, she just watched them walk away. the little girl clutching the book to her chest, already absorbed in looking at the pictures. Catherine felt tears forming. That moment, that small, ordinary moment of a child connecting with something she'd created, it meant more to her than any successful corporate website launch ever had. This was why she'd become an artist, not for money or prestige, but for this, creating something that touched people, that brought joy or meaning or beauty into their lives. She had forgotten this during her years of commercial success. The twisted ankle, that seemingly random accident, had brought her back to it. 2 years after the ankle injury, Catherine was invited to speak at her old university's design program. She talked to the students about her career journey, about how she'd achieved commercial success but lost creative authenticity, about how a twisted ankle had forced her to stop and reconsider everything. The accident seemed like terrible luck. She told the students, "I was angry about the timing, frustrated by the limitation. But that forced pause created space for awareness I desperately needed. It redirected me back toward work I love, toward creative projects that feed my soul rather than just my bank account." A student raised her hand. "But couldn't you have had that realization without hurting yourself? Couldn't you have just chosen to slow down and reflect?" Catherine considered this thoughtfully. "Probably, but I wasn't choosing it. I was too busy, too caught up in the momentum of my commercial success. I needed something to force me to stop, to create stillness I wouldn't have created for myself." The ankle injury did that. In Buddhism, they talk about how suffering can be a teacher. My physical pain was minor, but the forced stillness was the teacher I needed. Catherine's story shows us something subtle about how everything happens for a reason. Her twisted ankle wasn't some cosmic lesson designed to teach her about authentic creativity. It was just an accident, the result of not paying attention while walking in the rain. But that accident created conditions, forced stillness, time for reflection, inability to maintain her usual frantic pace. Those conditions allowed awareness to emerge that had been trying to surface for years but kept getting drowned out by busyness. The awareness led to action. Action led to change. Change led to a more authentic, satisfying life. The reason wasn't predetermined. It emerged through how Catherine responded to the accident. She could have spent those 2 weeks just frustrated, just focused on getting back to normal as quickly as possible. Instead, she allowed the stillness to work on her, stayed open to what it might reveal. The accident created conditions, but Catherine created the meaning by how she worked with those conditions. This is the dance between fate and free will that Buddhism describes. Events happen, accidents, illnesses, losses, unexpected opportunities. These events arise from causes and conditions, from the vast web of interconnection. But the meaning we make from those events, how we respond to them, what we allow them to teach us, this is where our freedom lives. Catherine's ankle twisted because she wasn't paying attention. That was cause and effect. But what happened because of the twisted ankle? That depended on how Catherine worked with the situation. Breathe slowly now, feeling yourself sinking even deeper into rest. Your body is so heavy, so relaxed, so ready for the deep sleep you need. Let these teachings settle into you without effort, without trying to remember or understand everything. The wisdom is finding you, working on you, preparing you to see your own life differently when you need to see it differently. Think about accidents or unexpected events in your own life. Things that seemed like bad luck or terrible timing. What if those weren't random misfortunes? What if they were creating conditions for awareness, for change, for redirection you needed but wouldn't have chosen? You don't have to be grateful for the pain, but can you be curious about what it might have made possible? What doors might have opened because other doors closed? What did you learn? Who did you meet? What changed because something unexpected happened? Sometimes, the teaching that everything happens for a reason reveals itself through what seems like pure coincidence, through meetings that feel orchestrated by forces beyond our understanding. In Auckland, New Zealand, a man named Daniel was about to experience this through a series of events so unlikely they would reshape his understanding of chance and fate entirely. Daniel was 45 years old, a high school history teacher who loved his work but had been struggling with a deep sadness he couldn't quite name. His life was fine on the surface: good job, nice apartment, a few close friends. But Daniel felt profoundly lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. He felt disconnected from meaning, from purpose, from the sense that his life mattered in any significant way. He would teach his classes competently, go home, watch television, go to bed, wake up, and repeat. It was fine. It was also slowly killing something inside him. One Saturday afternoon in autumn, Daniel was walking through a park near his apartment, not going anywhere in particular, just trying to get out of his apartment for a while. He passed a bench where an elderly man was sitting, feeding birds. Something about the man's peaceful presence made Daniel pause. Without planning to, Daniel sat down on the other end of the bench. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, both watching the birds. Then the elderly man spoke, his accent suggesting he was originally from somewhere in Asia. Beautiful, isn't it? How they trust that the seeds will be there. They don't worry about tomorrow's food. They just come, eat, fly away. Daniel nodded. I suppose they don't have much choice. They're just birds. The man smiled. Or maybe they understand something we've forgotten. That life provides. That we're held by something larger than ourselves. That trust is possible. Daniel felt something stir in his chest at these words. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then the man stood to leave. It was nice sharing this bench with you, young man. May you find what you're looking for. He walked away before Daniel could respond, leaving Daniel with an odd feeling that this brief encounter had meant something, though he couldn't say what. Over the following weeks, Daniel found himself thinking about the old man's words. May you find what you're looking for. The problem was, Daniel didn't know what he was looking for. He just knew something was missing. Some sense of connection or meaning that made life feel worth living beyond just going through the motions. One evening, Daniel was walking home from school through a different route than usual. He had stayed late for a faculty meeting and was taking a shortcut through an unfamiliar neighborhood. He passed a small building with a sign, Auckland Meditation Center, all welcome. On impulse, Daniel walked in. There was a woman at a desk in the entrance, maybe in her 60s, with kind eyes. Can I help you? She asked. Daniel hesitated. I saw the sign. I don't know anything about meditation, but I'm looking for something. I don't know what. The woman smiled with recognition. That's the best reason to start meditating. Knowing something's missing without knowing what. I'm Helen. We have a beginner's class starting in 20 minutes, if you'd like to stay. Daniel almost left. This felt too vulnerable, too strange. But that voice inside that was searching for something made him stay. The class was small, maybe 8 people, led by a teacher named Robert, who explained the basics of mindfulness meditation. You sit till you breathe. You notice when your mind wanders. You bring it back to the breath. That's it. Simple, but not easy. They practiced for 20 minutes. Daniel's mind wandered constantly to his lesson plans, to what he'd have for dinner, to whether he looked stupid sitting there with his eyes closed. But there were moments, brief moments, where his mind settled and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Simple peace. After the class, Daniel approached Robert. That was harder than I expected. My mind wouldn't stop. Robert smiled. Everyone's mind is like that at first. The practice isn't about stopping your mind. It's about noticing when it wanders and gently bringing it back. Over and over. That's where the learning happens. Daniel started attending the weekly class, then the twice-weekly sessions. Meditation didn't come easily to him. His mind was busy, restless, full of thoughts about work and worry about the future. But gradually, over weeks and months, something began to shift. He started noticing space between thoughts. Moments where he wasn't caught up in mental commentary about his life, but was simply present with what was actually happening. And in those moments, he felt connected to something larger than his individual self. Something peaceful and vast that had always been there, but that his busy mind usually obscured. 3 months after starting meditation, Daniel was at the center for a Saturday morning session when he noticed someone new had joined the class. A woman about his age, with an open, gentle face. After the session, as people were having tea, Daniel found himself talking to her. Her name was Margaret. She was a nurse who had been through a difficult divorce and was using meditation to help process the grief and find her footing again. They talked for an hour, and Daniel felt a connection he hadn't felt with anyone in years. Not romantic necessarily, though there was that too, but more fundamentally, a sense of being truly seen and heard by another person. They exchanged numbers, started meeting for coffee after meditation sessions, eventually started spending time together outside the center. Margaret had a quality of presence that Daniel found magnetic. She listened deeply, spoke honestly, had done enough inner work that she could be vulnerable without being needy, strong without being defended. 6 months after they met, they were hiking together in the hills outside Auckland. They had been dating for 3 months, taking things slowly, both wary from past relationship disappointments. They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking the city and ocean. Daniel turned to Margaret. "Can I tell you something strange?" She nodded. 6 months before I met you, I was sitting on a park bench feeling more lonely than I'd ever felt in my life. An old man sat down and fed the birds and said something about how they trust that the seeds will be there, about how life provides. I didn't understand what he meant then. Daniel paused, looking out at the view. Then, that same week, I happened to walk past the meditation center, and that led to meditation, which led to meeting you. And now, sitting here with you, I feel the opposite of how I felt on that park bench. I feel connected, like my life has meaning, like I'm part of something larger. Margaret took his hand. That's a beautiful story. But you know what I think? I think the old man and the meditation center, those weren't coincidences. I think you were ready to wake up from whatever sleepwalk you'd been in, and life conspired to help you. Daniel thought about this. You mean it was all meant to happen? Margaret shook her head. Not meant to in some predetermined way, but everything is connected. Your loneliness had gotten intense enough that you were finally ready to do something about it. So you noticed the old man's words. You walked past the meditation center and actually went in instead of walking by. You came to class instead of staying home. You talked to me instead of staying quiet. Each step created conditions for the next step. That's not fate. That's the natural unfolding of causes and conditions. 2 years later, Daniel and Margaret were married in a simple ceremony at the meditation center where they met. Robert, their teacher, officiated. In his remarks, Robert spoke about the web of interconnection that had brought them together. We think coincidences are random, but Buddhism teaches that nothing is random. Everything arises from causes and conditions. Daniel's loneliness created the condition for him to be open to the old man's words. Those words created the condition for him to notice the meditation center. The meditation practice created the condition for him to be present enough to truly connect with Margaret when they met. Each thing led naturally to the next thing. Robert continued, "This is what we mean when we say everything happens for a reason. Not that some deity planned your meeting, but that your meeting was the natural result of countless causes coming together at exactly the right moment." If Daniel hadn't felt that particular quality of loneliness that day in the park, if he hadn't taken that particular route home from work, if Margaret's divorce hadn't happened when it did, if she hadn't decided to try meditation, if you both hadn't come to class on that particular Saturday, you wouldn't be here today. The web of causes and conditions had to align perfectly for this moment to happen. After the ceremony, Daniel stood with Margaret, watching their friends and family celebrate. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from profound loneliness to deep connection, from meaninglessness to purpose, from isolation to belonging. Every step had felt random at the time. Meeting the old man in the park, walking past the meditation center, deciding to go in, meeting Margaret. But looking back, he could see the thread connecting everything, how each moment had created conditions for the next. A year after their wedding, Daniel received unexpected news. His mother, who lived in a small town in the South Island, had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. She needed family nearby, needed help managing daily life. Daniel and Margaret made the difficult decision to leave Auckland, to move to the small town where Daniel had grown up, to help care for his mother during her declining years. It meant leaving their jobs, their community at the meditation center, the life they'd built together in Auckland. The move was hard. The small town had limited job opportunities. Daniel found work teaching at the local high school, but it wasn't the position he'd had in Auckland. Margaret struggled to find nursing work and ended up taking a job at a care facility that paid less than what she'd earned before. They missed their meditation community, missed the city, missed the life they'd been forced to leave. Daniel's mother's condition declined steadily. Some days she recognized him. Some days she didn't. Caring for her was emotionally exhausting on top of everything else. 6 months into this new life, Daniel was sitting with his mother one afternoon. She was having a good day, lucid and present. They were looking through old photo albums together. His mother pointed to a picture of Daniel as a young boy, maybe 7 years old. "You were always such a serious child," she said, "always asking big questions about life and meaning. I remember you asking me once, 'Mum, why are we here? What's the point of everything?'" Daniel smiled, not remembering this, but able to imagine it. His mother continued, her eyes clear and focused in a way they rarely were anymore. I didn't have a good answer for you then. I told you we're here to love each other, to be kind, to make the world a little better. You seemed disappointed. You wanted a bigger answer. She paused, looking at him with surprising intensity. But now, at the end of my life, I think that answer was right. We're here to love, to connect, to care for each other. That's all. That's everything. Daniel felt tears forming. His mother was giving him something precious: lucidity, wisdom, presence, all things that were becoming increasingly rare as the dementia progressed. "Mum, I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad I could come take care of you." She squeezed his hand. "I know it's hard for you, leaving your life in Auckland, but I'm grateful. And I want you to know, even though I won't remember this conversation tomorrow, even though I'm losing my mind bit by bit, I'm at peace. I had a good life. I loved and was loved. That's enough." That evening, Daniel told Margaret about the conversation. She said, "We're here to love each other. That's the point of everything." And I realized, sitting there with her, that this is what Buddhism has been teaching me all along. Everything is interconnected. We're all part of this web of relationship and connection. The point isn't individual achievement or success. The point is how we show up for each other. Margaret nodded. "And you're showing up for your mum. That matters more than any job or city." Daniel felt something settle in him. He had been resenting the move, feeling like their life had been derailed, like they'd been forced off course. But what if this was the course? What if caring for his mother during her final years was exactly what he was meant to be doing right now? What if the web of causes and conditions, his mother's illness, the move, the sacrifice, was steering him towards something essential about love and connection and what life is actually for? Daniel's mother died 18 months after they moved to be near her. The final months had been difficult, watching her disappear bit by bit into the fog of dementia. But Daniel didn't regret a moment of being there. He had been present for her journey, had held her hand through the confusion and fear. She had reminded her she was loved even when she didn't remember who he was. At the funeral, Daniel gave a eulogy about connection and impermanence, about how we're all here for such a short time, about how the meaning of life is found in how we love each other through that brief time. After the funeral, Margaret found Daniel in their garden. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm thinking about the old man in the park, the one who told me to trust that the seeds will be there. I think I finally understand what he meant. Life provides what we need when we need it. Not always what we want, but what we need. I needed to learn meditation. I needed to meet you. I needed to move here to care for my mum. Each thing led to the next thing. Each thing was necessary." He paused, then added, "I was angry about leaving Auckland, about giving up our life there. But now I can see that caring for my mum was a gift. I got to be present for her final journey. I got to tell her I loved her while she could still sometimes understand. If her illness had happened 5 years earlier, before I met you, before meditation taught me how to be present with difficulty, I don't think I could have done it. But everything that happened prepared me for this. The loneliness that drove me to seek connection, the meditation that taught me presence, meeting you, which taught me what real partnership looks like. It all led here." Margaret put her arm around him. "Buddhism teaches that everything is connected. Your mother's illness, painful as it was, gave you the opportunity to practice everything you'd learned, to show up with love and presence, to care for someone who couldn't care for herself. That's the essence of compassion. Daniel nodded. And I wouldn't trade those 18 months for anything, even though it was hard, even though I watched her fade. I was there. I showed up. That matters more than any career success or comfortable life in Auckland. Several months after his mother's death, Daniel and Margaret were still living in the small town, trying to decide what to do next. They could move back to Auckland, try to rebuild their previous life, or they could stay, make a new life here. One afternoon, Daniel was walking through town when he passed the local community center. There was a sign, free meditation class, beginners welcome. On impulse, he walked in. The center was small and run down compared to the beautiful space in Auckland. There were only 3 people in the class, led by a young woman who was clearly new to teaching. Nervous and unsure, Daniel sat through the session, which was sweet but basic. Afterward, the young teacher approached him. "Thank you for coming. I just started teaching. I'm trying to bring meditation to this community, but it's been slow. Not many people are interested." Daniel felt something click into place. "What if I helped you? I've been practicing for several years. I could co-teach with you, help build the program." The young woman's face lit up. "Really? That would be amazing." Over the following months, Daniel and the young teacher, whose name was Sophie, built the meditation program. Word spread slowly in the small town. People came tentatively at first, then more regularly. They created a weekly class, then twice weekly, then a monthly day-long retreat. Daniel discovered he had a gift for teaching meditation, for helping people understand these practices in accessible ways. He shared his own journey from loneliness to connection, from despair to meaning, from resistance to acceptance. People responded to his honesty, to the fact that he wasn't some enlightened guru, but just an ordinary person who had found these practices helpful. One evening, an older man approached Daniel after class. "I've been coming for 3 months now. I just want to thank you. My wife died last year, and I didn't know how to keep living. These practices are teaching me how to be present with grief instead of running from it. You're doing important work here." Daniel felt profound gratitude. He had resented moving to this small town, had seen it as sacrificing his life in Auckland. But that move had led here, to teaching meditation in a community that desperately needed it, to helping people navigate their own suffering with more skill and compassion. If his mother hadn't gotten sick, if they hadn't moved, if he hadn't walked past that community center, none of this would have happened. The thread connected everything: the park bench conversation, the meditation center in Auckland, meeting Margaret, moving for his mother, staying after her death, finding Sophie, and the small meditation program that was becoming his new purpose. 2 years after his mother's death, Daniel was co-leading a meditation retreat with Sophie. During a break, he sat outside, watching birds, thinking about the old man in the park who had started all of this years ago with his simple comment about trust and seeds. Daniel realized he'd never properly thanked that man, had never even learned his name. But in a way, he was thanking him now by teaching what he'd learned, by passing on the practices that had transformed his life, by helping others find the connection and meaning he'd found. That evening during the retreat, Daniel shared his story with the group. 6 years ago, I was profoundly lonely. I didn't understand the point of my life. An old man I met by chance said something that planted a seed. That seed led to meditation. Meditation led to meeting my wife. Meeting my wife led to moving here to care for my dying mother. Caring for my mother deepened my understanding of love and impermanence. And all of that led here, to teaching meditation in this community, to helping you develop these practices. He paused, looking at the faces around him. None of it felt like it was happening for a reason at the time. The loneliness felt meaningless. Moving here felt like sacrifice. But looking back, I can see the web of causes and conditions connecting everything. Each difficult thing created conditions for the next meaningful thing. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. It was all steering me here, to this moment, to this work, to you. A woman in the group raised her hand. But how do you trust that when you're in the middle of the difficulty, when you can't see where it's leading? Daniel nodded. That's the hardest part. You can't see where it's leading. You can only practice trusting that it's leading somewhere. Buddhism teaches that everything arises from causes and conditions. When something difficult happens, it's creating causes for future effects you can't predict. The practice is staying open to those future effects instead of closing down in bitterness. He continued, when I moved here, I was bitter. I resented leaving Auckland, resented the sacrifice. But staying open, even through that resentment, allowed me to notice the community center, to offer to help Sophie, to discover teaching as a new purpose. If I'd stayed closed in bitterness, I would have missed all of that. The difficulty was the same, but my relationship to it determined what became possible. After the retreat, Sophie approached Daniel. I want to tell you something. When I first started trying to teach meditation here, I was about to give up. 3 people in a dingy community center. It felt pointless. Then you walked in that day. You were the answer to a prayer I didn't even know I'd been praying. This program exists because you showed up. Daniel felt emotion rise in his throat, and I only showed up because of everything that happened before. The loneliness, the old man, the meditation center in Auckland, Margaret, my mother's illness, all of it. Sophie, we're all part of this web. You needed help building this program. I needed new purpose after my mother died. The web of causes and conditions brought us together at exactly the right moment. That night, lying in bed next to Margaret, Daniel reflected on his journey. You know what's remarkable? Every single thing that happened, even the painful things, especially the painful things, they all mattered. The loneliness drove me to seek connection. Meeting you taught me what partnership could be. My mother's illness brought me here. Her death freed me to find teaching. It's all connected. Nothing was wasted. Margaret turned to face him in the dark. Do you still miss Auckland sometimes? Daniel thought about this honestly. Sometimes, but I don't regret being here. This is where I'm meant to be right now. This is what I'm meant to be doing. When that changes, when the web of causes and conditions steers me somewhere else, I'll trust that too. He paused, then added, I think that's what the old man in the park was trying to tell me. Trust. Trust that life provides. Trust that you're held by something larger than yourself. Trust that even when you can't see the pattern, there is a pattern. Daniel's story reveals the teaching of interconnection and trust in its fullest form. Nothing in his journey was predetermined. But nothing was random either. Each event arose from causes and conditions, created new causes and conditions, led naturally to the next thing. His loneliness created readiness for the old man's words. The old man's words created openness to the meditation center. Meditation created the conditions for meeting Margaret. Margaret created partnership that could navigate the move to care for his mother. His mother's illness created the opportunity to practice presence and compassion. Her death created space for teaching. Teaching created purpose and meaning he never could have planned. The reason things happened wasn't visible in the moment. It revealed itself through how Daniel responded to what happened, through staying open even in difficulty, through trusting that each challenge was steering him somewhere, even when he couldn't see where. This is what Buddhism means by everything happening for a reason, not predetermined fate, but the natural unfolding of causes and conditions, each moment creating possibilities for the next. The web of connection weaving something intricate and meaningful even when we can't see the full pattern. Breathe slowly, deeply, feeling yourself drifting deeper into rest with each exhale. All these stories, all these teachings about meaning and purpose and the web of connection, they're settling into you now at levels deeper than conscious thought. You don't need to remember every detail. You just need to receive the essence. Nothing is random. Nothing is wasted. Everything is connected. Your life is unfolding exactly as it needs to unfold. The web of cause and effect that Buddhism describes isn't just about big life events, career changes, relationships, moves, losses. It's also in the smallest moments, the tiny choices, the seemingly insignificant encounters that ripple outward in ways we never see. Every kind word you speak creates conditions for kindness to spread. Every moment of presence you bring to a conversation creates space for real connection. Every time you choose compassion over judgment, you're setting causes in motion that will create effects you can't predict. You're not separate from this web. You're woven into it. Part of it, creating ripples with every choice, every action, every thought. This is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because you realize how little you control, how much of life unfolds according to patterns larger than your individual will. Empowering because you realize your actions matter. Your choices create causes. You're constantly shaping what comes next, even if you can't see exactly how. When you understand this deeply, when you really take it in, that everything is connected and nothing is random, it changes how you relate to difficulty. You stop seeing challenges as meaningless suffering or cosmic punishment. You start seeing them as part of the web, creating conditions for growth you can't yet see, steering you toward purposes you haven't discovered. You practice trusting the process even when you can't see where it's going. This trust isn't passive resignation. It's not saying everything happens for a reason, so I'll just accept whatever comes. It's actively engaging with what comes while trusting that it's part of a larger pattern. Sarah actively worked with her failed bookstore, which led to the mobile library. Michael actively engaged with his tremors, which led to teaching. Rebecca actively pursued adoption, which led to Sophie. Christopher actively transformed his business failure into helping others. Emma actively worked with her injury, which led to adaptive dance. Catherine actively used her forced stillness, which led back to creative work. Daniel actively showed up for meditation, for Margaret, for his mother, for teaching. They all engaged actively with what happened while trusting it was leading somewhere. This is the dance full engagement with life as it unfolds, combined with trust in the larger pattern, even when you can't see it. You show up fully for what's in front of you while releasing attachment to specific outcomes. You do your best while trusting that your best, combined with all the other causes and conditions at play, will lead where it needs to lead. Feel yourself sinking even deeper now into complete relaxation, complete rest, complete trust. Your body knows how to let go, how to release into sleep, how to trust that restoration will happen without your conscious effort. You can practice this same trust with your life, engaging fully while releasing the need to control every outcome. Showing up completely while trusting you're held by something larger than yourself. Buddhism teaches that we're all walking each other home. Every person you meet, every interaction you have, it's part of the web of connection that's holding all of us, teaching all of us, steering all of us toward awakening. The old man in the park walked Daniel toward meditation. Margaret walked Daniel toward partnership and presence. Daniel's mother walked him toward understanding, love, and impermanence. Sophie walked him toward teaching. And Daniel is now walking others toward peace and meaning. You're part of this same web. People you've met have walked you toward where you are now. And you're walking others, whether you realize it or not, toward where they need to go. Every act of kindness, every moment of presence, every word of encouragement, it ripples outward through the web in ways you'll never fully see. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is too small to matter. Everything counts. As you drift toward sleep now, consider the web of connection that brought you to this moment. What chain of events led you here? Listening to these words, receiving these teachings, how many causes had to come together for this exact moment to happen? Every choice you made today, every person you encountered, every twist in your path, it all led here. And this moment is creating causes for tomorrow's moments. Rippling forward into a future you can't predict but can trust is unfolding exactly as it needs to. Let yourself relax into this trust. Let yourself be held by the web of connection that's always been holding you, even when you couldn't see it. Let yourself release the burden of trying to control everything, figure everything out, to make everything work according to your plans. You're part of something vast and intricate and elegant. You're held. You're guided. You're exactly where you need to be. This understanding that we're held by the web of connection, that we're guided even when we can't see the guiding hand, reveals itself in the most unexpected moments. Sometimes it comes through what feels like the smallest inconvenience, something so minor we barely notice it, yet it changes everything that follows. This is our last story tonight, and if you're still here with me, please like and subscribe to support me. In Edinburgh, Scotland, a woman named Fiona was about to experience this truth through something as simple as missing a train. Fiona was a journalist, 39 years old, specializing in investigative reporting. She was driven, focused, always chasing the next story, the next deadline. One Thursday morning, Fiona was rushing to catch the 7:15 train to London for an important interview with a whistleblower who had information about corporate fraud. This interview could make her career, could be the story she'd been working toward for years. She had planned everything perfectly. Wake at 6, leave by 6:45, catch the 7:15 train, arrive in London with time to prepare before the 11 meeting. But that morning, everything went wrong in small ways. Her alarm didn't go off. The power had flickered during the night, resetting her clock. She woke at 6:30 inches of panic. Then she couldn't find her notebook with all her research. Then traffic was unusually heavy. By the time she reached the train station, it was 7:17. She ran to the platform just in time to see her train pulling away. The next train wasn't for 2 hours. 2 hours. She would miss her interview. The whistleblower had been clear this time only. No rescheduling. He was risking too much to meet with her. Fiona stood on the platform, feeling her career opportunity disappear with that train. She wanted to scream, to cry, to rage at the universe for the series of small failures that had cost her everything. Instead, she slumped onto a bench, pulled out her phone, and sent the whistleblower an apology, explaining she'd missed her train. He responded immediately, "I understand. Maybe it wasn't meant to be." Fiona felt sick. Wasn't meant to be. What a useless platitude. Things didn't happen, or not happen, for cosmic reasons. She had just failed through a series of small mistakes. Sitting there on the bench, feeling defeated, Fiona noticed a young woman crying a few feet away. The woman was maybe 25, holding a suitcase, clearly distressed. Without thinking, Fiona asked, "Are you okay?" The young woman looked up, wiping her eyes. "I'm supposed to be getting on a train to leave my abusive boyfriend. I've been planning this for weeks. But now that I'm here, I'm terrified. What if I can't make it on my own? What if he's right that I'm nothing without him?" Fiona felt something shift in her chest. She sat down next to the young woman. "What's your name?" "Claire." Fiona took a breath. "Claire, I don't know you, but I can tell you this with absolute certainty. You can make it on your own. You're already making it on your own right now. You got yourself to this train station. You bought that ticket. You're choosing your freedom. That takes incredible strength." Claire was crying harder now. "I'm so scared." "Fear is normal," Fiona said gently. "But staying with someone who abuses you because you're scared of change, that's giving fear control over your whole life. You deserve better than that." They talked for an hour. Fiona shared resources for domestic violence survivors, helped Claire make a plan for where she'd stay in London, gave her the number for a women's shelter, helped her see that she had options and support available. When Claire's train came, she hugged Fiona tightly. "Thank you. I think you saved my life today." Watching Claire's train pull away, Fiona felt something profound. If she had caught her 7:15 train, she would have missed Claire. This young woman, terrified and alone, about to make the most important decision of her life, needed someone to tell her she could do it. And Fiona had been there, at exactly the right moment, because she'd missed her train. Over the following days, Fiona couldn't stop thinking about Claire. She had reached out to check on her, and Claire was doing well staying at the shelter, beginning to rebuild her life. Grateful for Fiona's support at that critical moment. But Fiona kept wondering about the timing. If any one small thing had gone differently that morning, if her alarm had worked, if she'd found her notebook immediately, if traffic had been normal, she would have caught that train. She would have made her interview, and Claire would have been alone on that platform, possibly talking herself out of leaving, possibly going back to her abuser. The journalist in Fiona wanted to dismiss this as coincidence, random events with no deeper meaning. But something about the precision of it unsettled her. Not just that she missed the train, but that she missed it by exactly 2 minutes, enough to be stuck at the station, but but early enough to meet Claire before her train left. What if it wasn't random? What if the alarm failing, the misplaced notebook, the unusual traffic? What if all those small inconveniences had happened specifically so she'd be on that platform at that exact moment? 2 weeks after missing the train, Fiona received an unexpected email from the whistleblower. "I know our meeting didn't happen, but I've been following your work, and I trust you. I'm ready to talk. Can we meet next week?" Fiona stared at the email in disbelief. She had assumed that opportunity was lost forever, but here it was, coming back around, giving her a second chance. They met the following Tuesday. The interview went brilliantly. The whistleblower gave her everything she needed for the story. But during their conversation, he said something that struck Fiona. "I was actually relieved when you missed our first meeting. I was terrified that day. Not ready. When you didn't show up, I took it as a sign to wait, to think more carefully. These extra 2 weeks gave me time to prepare myself emotionally for what coming forward would mean." Fiona felt chills run through her. Missing the train hadn't cost her the story. It had given the whistleblower time he needed to be truly ready. If they'd met that first day, he might have panicked and backed out. The timing that had seemed so disastrous had actually been perfect. Her missing the train served 2 purposes she couldn't have predicted. It put her on that platform to help Claire, and it gave her source the time he needed. Walking out of that interview, Fiona felt her understanding of reality shift. She had spent her career as a journalist believing in facts, evidence, things that could be proven and verified. But this experience pointed to something else, an intelligence in how events unfold, a pattern larger than individual intention. That evening, Fiona called her sister, Moira, who had been studying Buddhism for years. Fiona had always been skeptical of Moira's spiritual interests, seeing them as unscientific and naive. But now she found herself telling Moira about missing the train, about Claire, about the whistleblower's email. "Moira, I can't explain this rationally. The odds of all those small things going wrong at exactly the right time to put me on that platform when Claire needed help, while also giving my source time he needed. It feels impossible, like something orchestrated it." Moira was quiet for a moment, then said, "Buddhism doesn't say some deity orchestrated it, but it does teach that everything is interconnected in ways our rational minds can't fully grasp. You, Claire, the whistleblower, you're all part of this web of causes and conditions. Your alarm failing created conditions for you to be late. Being late created conditions for meeting Claire. Meeting Claire served her need for support and your need to help someone. Missing the first interview created conditions for your source to be more ready when you did meet. Everything connected perfectly, not because someone planned it, but because that's how the web of interdependence works." Fiona tried to take this in. "So you're saying it all happened for a reason, but not because of some cosmic plan?" Moira laughed gently. "Exactly. The reason emerges through the interconnection of everything. You were where you needed to be when you needed to be there. Claire was where she needed to be. Your source needed more time. All these needs were met through what looked like random inconvenience, but was actually the web working perfectly." Over the following months, Fiona stayed in touch with Claire, watching her build a new life free from abuse. Claire started volunteering at the domestic violence shelter that had helped her, using her experience to support other women leaving abusive relationships. One day, Claire called Fiona. "I want to tell you something. That day at the train station, I was literally about to go home to my boyfriend. I had had my phone out to call him, to tell him I was sorry for being dramatic, that I'd come home. Then you sat down and asked if I was okay. You were the only thing that kept me from going back. You saved my life. Fiona, do you understand that? Fiona felt tears forming. I'm glad I was there. But Claire, you saved yourself. You got yourself to that station. You bought that ticket. I just reminded you of your own strength. Claire's voice was firm. Maybe. But I needed that reminder at that exact moment. If you'd come 5 minutes later, I would have been gone. The timing was perfect. It felt like the universe put you there. After hanging up, Fiona thought about timing, about precision, about the intricate choreography of events that had to align for her to be on that platform when Claire needed her. Her alarm had to fail. She had to lose time looking for her notebook. Traffic had to be heavy. Each delay precise enough to make her miss the 7:15 train, but arrive before Claire's train left. The story Fiona had been chasing, the corporate fraud investigation, was published 6 months later. It won awards, advanced her career exactly as she'd hoped. But that wasn't what she thought about when she reflected on that morning. She thought about Claire, about being exactly where she needed to be at exactly the right moment, about how what seemed like failure had actually been perfect timing for purposes she couldn't have predicted. A year after missing the train, Fiona was asked to speak at a journalism conference about her investigative work. At the end of her talk, she decided to share the story about missing the train, about Claire, about learning that sometimes our failures serve purposes we can't see. I spent my career believing in facts, in things I could prove and verify, Fiona told the audience. But I've learned there are patterns in life that can't be reduced to facts. Patterns of connection and timing that are too precise to be random, but too subtle to be proven. I missed a train, and it seemed like disaster. But it put me exactly where someone needed me to be, while giving someone else time they needed. The web of connection is real, even if we can't see all its threads. After the talk, a young journalist approached Fiona. I needed to hear that story. 3 months ago, I lost my job at a newspaper. I thought my career was over. But because I lost that job, I had time to investigate a story independently that no publication would have given me time for. That investigation just won me a position at a major paper. What seemed like the worst thing that happened to me led to the best opportunity. Your story helped me see that my firing had a purpose. Fiona squeezed the young journalist's hand. That's exactly it. We can't see the purpose in the moment. We only see the loss, the failure, the disappointment. But looking back, we can trace the threads. We can see how the thing that seemed like disaster was actually redirection. Driving home that evening, Fiona reflected on how much her understanding of reality had shifted in 1 year. She still believed in facts, in evidence, in rigorous investigation. But she also now believed in the web of connection that Buddhism describes, in the intelligence of how events unfold, in purposes that reveal themselves only in retrospect. She thought about her alarm failing, about misplacing her notebook, about heavy traffic, all the small frustrations that had seemed meaningless in the moment, but had conspired to put her on that platform when Claire needed her. She thought about how the whistleblower needed those extra 2 weeks to be ready. She thought about how everything had worked together perfectly for purposes she couldn't have planned or predicted. Missing that train was one of the best things that ever happened to her, though she'd never have believed it in the moment. Fiona's story teaches us that the web of cause and effect operates at every level, in every moment, through the smallest details, not just in big life events, but in minor inconveniences, small delays, tiny frustrations that seem meaningless until we see what they made possible. Her alarm failing wasn't random bad luck. Her misplaced notebook wasn't just forgetfulness. The heavy traffic wasn't just inconvenience. Each was a thread in the web, creating conditions for her to be exactly where she needed to be when Claire needed her, while also giving the whistleblower time he needed. The precision of it suggests something profound about how reality works. Not that some deity micromanages every detail, but that everything is interconnected so completely that causes create effects in ways that serve needs we don't even know exist. Fiona's need to help someone, Claire's need for support, the whistleblower's need for more time. All these needs were met through what looked like random inconvenience, but was actually the web working with perfect intelligence. This is the deepest teaching about everything happening for a reason. The reason isn't always visible. Sometimes it takes months or years to reveal itself. Sometimes we never fully understand it, but we can practice trusting that there is a reason. There is a pattern. Even the smallest frustrations are part of the web of connection that's holding everything, guiding everything, steering everything toward where it needs to go. Breathe deeply now, feeling yourself completely relaxed, completely at peace, completely ready for deep restorative sleep. Let these final teachings settle into you, joining all the wisdom you've received tonight. You're held by the web. You're guided by the web. Even your frustrations and disappointments are threads in the pattern. Nothing is random. Nothing is wasted. Everything is steering you exactly where you need to go. Tonight you've journeyed through many stories, many lives transformed by understanding that everything happens for a reason. Not reason in some simplistic way, not divine punishment or reward, but reason as the natural unfolding of causes and conditions, the intricate web of connection that holds everything. Sarah taught us that apparent failures often redirect us toward purposes we couldn't have imagined. Her failed bookstore seemed like the death of her dream, but it led her to work she loved far more, the mobile library serving people who needed it most. What looked like disaster was actually steering her toward her true calling. She learned to trace the threads forward, to see how each disappointment had created conditions for unexpected growth. Her story shows us that when we can't see the reason something happened, we can practice trusting that the reason will reveal itself in time. Michael showed us that losing what we think defines us can free us to discover who we actually are. When Tremors ended his surgical career, he thought his life was over. But that loss redirected him toward teaching compassionate medicine, toward touching thousands of lives instead of hundreds, toward transforming medical culture from the inside. His story teaches that our identities aren't fixed, that endings of one purpose create space for purposes we couldn't have discovered any other way. What felt like cruel fate, destroying his calling, was actually revealing his deeper calling. Rebecca's journey through infertility revealed how closed doors can steer us toward doors we didn't know existed. Years of trying to conceive felt meaningless until she understood it was steering her toward Sophie, toward a specific child who needed the specific parent Rebecca could be. Her suffering had prepared her, taught her patience, resilience, how to love a child who came to her in an unexpected way. If biological children had come easily, she never would have adopted. Sophie would still be in foster care. The infertility that seemed like the universe saying no to motherhood was actually saying not that way, steering her toward the child who needed her most. Christopher's story taught us that even complete business failure can have purpose. 25 years building a company that ended in bankruptcy seemed like wasted time until he understood that the company's purpose wasn't to last forever. Its purpose was to teach him what he needed to learn, to prepare him for work he couldn't have done without that experience. His failure became the foundation for helping other entrepreneurs navigate their own failures with grace and wisdom. What looked like the end of his purpose was actually the beginning of his real purpose. Emma discovered that devastating injury can crack open narrow definitions and reveal deeper truth. Losing professional dance felt like losing everything until adaptive dance showed her what dance really is. Not perfect technique, but authentic expression. Not flawless execution, but truth in movement. Her students taught her more about dance in 6 months than she'd learned in 20 years of professional training. The injury that seemed to destroy her career actually revealed her true relationship with dance and led her to work far more meaningful than performance. Catherine learned that even minor accidents can redirect entire lives. A twisted ankle forced stillness she wouldn't have chosen, and that stillness created space for awareness she desperately needed. She had lost connection with creative work she loved, had been too busy to notice. The forced pause let her rediscover authentic creativity. To finish the children's book that became her new direction. What seemed like terrible timing, spraining her ankle when she was so busy, was actually perfect timing, stopping her long enough to remember what mattered. Daniel's journey showed us how loneliness can be the teacher that guides us home. His profound disconnection drove him to notice the old man's words about trust, to walk into the meditation center, to meet Margaret, to care for his dying mother with presence, to discover teaching as his purpose. Each piece connected to the next in a chain he couldn't have planned. His story teaches that we're all walking each other home, that every encounter is part of the web guiding us toward awakening, toward connection, toward purpose. And Fiona revealed how even the smallest inconveniences, a failed alarm, a misplaced notebook, heavy traffic, can serve purposes we never see. Missing her train by 2 minutes put her exactly where Claire needed her to be, while giving her source time he needed. The precision of it, the intelligence in how events aligned, pointed to a web of connection operating at every level, in every moment. Through details so small we usually dismiss them as random. All these stories point to the same essential truth. We live in a web of connection so intricate, so intelligent, so precise that nothing happens randomly. Every event arises from causes and conditions. Every event creates causes for future conditions. What seems like chaos is actually elegant order. What feels like cruel fate is actually redirection. What looks like meaningless suffering is actually preparing us for purposes we haven't yet discovered. This doesn't mean everything that happens is good or that we should be grateful for pain. Sarah's bookstore failure hurt. Michael's tremors were devastating. Rebecca's infertility was agony. Christopher's company collapse was crushing. Emma's injury shattered her. Catherine's frustration was real. Daniel's loneliness was profound. Fiona's missed opportunity felt like career death. The pain was real in every case. Buddhism isn't asking us to pretend pain doesn't hurt or that loss isn't genuine. But Buddhism is teaching us that pain and loss aren't the end of the story. They're threads in the web, creating conditions for whatever comes next. They're preparing us, steering us, shaping us in ways we can't see while we're in them. The purpose reveals itself later, sometimes months later, sometimes years later, sometimes only when we look back at our whole lives and see the pattern we couldn't see while living it. This teaching asks us to hold both truths simultaneously. This hurts. and this is leading somewhere. I didn't want this, and this is creating conditions for something I can't yet see. I'm grieving what I lost, and I'm staying open to what might come. This is the practice, fully feeling the pain while trusting the larger pattern. Engaging completely with what's in front of us while releasing attachment to specific outcomes. Showing up for our lives while trusting we're held by something larger than ourselves. The web of cause and effect operates whether we believe in it or not. Causes create effects. Effects become causes. Everything connects to everything else in an infinite dance of interdependence. But when we understand this, when we really take it in that nothing is random and nothing is wasted, it changes how we live. We stop fighting so hard with what is. We start trusting that even difficult things are part of the pattern. We practice staying curious about where challenges might be leading, instead of collapsing into despair that they're meaningless. This trust doesn't make pain disappear. Sarah still grieved her bookstore. Michael still mourned surgery. Rebecca still felt the ache of infertility. But the trust changed their relationship to the pain. Instead of adding suffering on top of pain, the suffering of this shouldn't be happening, and this is meaningless, and why me? They could hold the pain while staying open to what it might be creating. They could grieve what was ending, while remaining curious about what might be beginning. You're part of this same web. Right now, as you rest here, breathing, you're held by causes stretching back through time, every choice your parents made, every event that shaped your family, every person who touched your life, every experience that formed you. And you're creating causes that will ripple forward into a future you can't predict. Every choice you make tomorrow, every person you'll meet, every word you'll speak, every action you'll take, you're both effect and cause, both shaped and shaping, both held and holding. The difficulties you've faced, they weren't random cruelty. They were threads in your unique pattern, preparing you for something, teaching you something, steering you toward purposes you may not have discovered yet. The disappointments that still hurt, the losses you still grieve, the doors that closed, the dreams that didn't materialize, these aren't evidence. The universe is against you. They're evidence you're part of the web, being guided even when you can't see the guidance, being prepared even when you don't know what you're being prepared for. You don't need to understand it all. You don't need to see the full pattern. You just need to trust that there is a pattern, that the web is holding you, that even your frustrations and failures are part of steering you exactly where you need to go. This trust is available now, in this moment, as you breathe and rest and allow yourself to be held by something larger than your individual understanding. Let yourself sink completely into this rest now. Let your body grow heavier with each breath, more relaxed, more ready for the deep sleep that restores you. Let your mind quiet, thoughts fading like distant clouds, barely noticeable. You're drifting in that peaceful space between waking and sleeping, held by awareness, safe in this moment, complete just as you are. Everything that happened to you today, everything that's happened in your life, it all led here to this moment of rest. And this moment is creating conditions for tomorrow's moments, for next week's experiences, for changes you can't yet imagine. The web is working. The pattern is unfolding. You're exactly where you need to be. Sleep now, dear friend. Sleep deeply and peacefully. Let go of everything you've heard tonight. You don't need to remember the stories consciously. They've already done their work, settling into you at levels deeper than thought, preparing you to see your own life differently when you need to see it differently. The wisdom is in you now, waiting to emerge when the moment is right. May you trust that everything in your life has happened for a reason, even when you can't see the reason yet. May you trust that closed doors have been steering you toward open doors you didn't know existed. May you trust that your disappointments and losses weren't meaningless, but were preparing you, shaping you, teaching you what you needed to learn. May you trust the web of connection that holds you, guides you, works through you in ways you can't fully see, but can deeply feel. May you wake tomorrow with peace in your heart, knowing you're part of something vast and intricate and beautiful. May you face whatever comes with curiosity instead of resistance, staying open to where life might be steering you, even through difficulty. May you practice trusting the process even when you can't see the destination, engaging fully with what's in front of you while releasing attachment to how you think it should unfold. May you remember that you're not alone in this web. Everyone you meet is part of it, walking each other home, teaching each other, helping each other discover the purposes we're here to serve. May you be gentle with yourself and others, knowing we're all doing our best within the web of causes and conditions we were born into. May you forgive yourself for mistakes, knowing they too are part of the pattern, creating causes for growth you can't yet see. May you find meaning in your struggles, purpose in your pain, growth in your losses. May you see clearly that nothing has been wasted, nothing has been random, everything has mattered. May you trust that your life is unfolding exactly as it needs to unfold, that you're being guided even when you feel lost, that you're held even when you feel alone. Rest now in this trust. Rest in the knowing that the web holds you. Rest in the certainty that you're exactly where you need to be. Let sleep take you gently into the darkness, into the peace, into the deep restoration your body and mind need. You're safe. You're held. You're loved by the web of life itself. Everything happens for a reason. Not always a reason you can see or understand, but a reason nonetheless. Your suffering has purpose. Your joy has meaning. Your life matters in ways that ripple outward through the web, touching lives you'll never know, creating effects you'll never see, contributing to the vast pattern of interconnection that holds all beings. Sleep deeply now. Dream peacefully. Wake renewed and trusting. May these teachings bring you freedom from unnecessary suffering. May you walk your path with faith in the web that guides you. May you find your way home to yourself, to meaning, to purpose, to peace. The web holds you. The pattern unfolds perfectly. You are enough. This moment is enough. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. Good night.